Chapter 850. The uncle of Jar Lane wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, "Brother Tang, have you perhaps misunderstood something? As someone with a different surname, I don't have the courage to participate in family matters." Tang 36 looked at him and smiled, saying, "I say, granduncle, at a time like this, can't we just make things a little simpler? Ning Shiwei is your nephew. After being tricked by you, do you think your wife will let you go? Quickly think of a way." Without waiting for the Tang's seventh master to speak, Tang 36's smile faded, and he seriously said, "Seventh aunt has been slept with by second uncle for so many years. Did you not know?" The Tang's seventh master's complexion became extremely nasty, but after a few moments, he unexpectedly calmed down. "Of course I know that you knew, but in the past, no one besides me knew. Now that I've exposed this matter, can you still pretend that you don't know?" Tang 36 gave him a pitying glance and said, "How do you resolve this matter now? Helping me kill second uncle is your only choice." The old guardian of the Tang clan had been standing by the mahjong table this entire time. No matter what secrets were involved in this game of cards, his expression did not change. But in the end, the admiration in his eyes when he looked at Tang 36 had increased. The three elders that he had called to the ancestral hall were normally not very eye-catching in the Tang clan. Very few people knew that they were the Tang's second master's true left and right arms. In his conversation with these three elders, his thoughts were not deep and his methods were not particularly impressive, but they were very suitable. He knew what these three elders feared the most, what they cared about the most, and what their true personalities were. This sort of understanding was the most frightening thing of all, and it was also an essential quality for one to become the head of the Tang clan. 2 hours finally passed. Winshui City left Tang 36's hands and returned to the Tang Old Masters. The gate of the ancestral hall closed once more, and it was impossible to say if there would ever be a day when it would open again. The three elders each had different emotions as they left. The last mahjong game on the table had not yet finished. The old guardian of the Tang clan did not leave. He continued to stand behind Tang 36. He was waiting for news from the Tang clan's old estate. This news would determine what he should do. This had nothing to do with right or wrong, only victory or defeat. This was the way of merchants. The winner takes all, and the loser leaves. If Tang 36 won, he would leave alive. If he lost, because of Chen Chongsheng, he probably wouldn't die, but he probably wouldn't be able to leave again. The mahjong game at the Tang family mansion ended a little earlier when the old master heard that Tang 36 had sent someone to the Chicken Crow Nunnery outside the city and asked for a vegetarian meal. In fact, until the end of the 2 hours, the vegetarian meal was still in the kitchen of the Chicken Crow Nunnery. It was not ready in time. The wind and snow fell silently in the courtyard of the old house. Just like the arrival of the emaciated old man, no one would be alarmed. Linghai Zhuang stared at the elder's face, finding it increasingly familiar. The skinny old man walked into the room, and several pairs of eyes looked at him. Even Zhixio felt somewhat nervous, not because of the emaciated old man's identity, but because of what he was about to say. Chen Chongsheng was not nervous, only silently making his preparations. If what he did next could not make the Tang Old Master change his mind, he could only use other methods. He did not want to use that method. Although he had a powerful helper outside Winshui City, he did not want the matter to develop to that point. But no matter what, he could not allow Tang 36 to continue being imprisoned in the Tang clan's ancestral hall. The emaciated old man first bowed to the Tang Old Master, and then to Chen Chongsheng, just like when he first appeared in the old estate. Chen Chongsheng did not know the true identity of the emaciated old man, but from the respect the Tang Old Master showed him, he knew that this person had an extraordinary background, so he seriously returned the bow. The Tang Old Master asked, "What was the result?" The emaciated old man indifferently replied, "His Holiness the Pope was correct. First Master truly was poisoned, and it was arranged by Second Master. I have already sent someone to the longevity sect to ask for the antidote." Hearing this, Chen Chongsheng and Zhixio glanced at each other, finally relaxing a little. The Tang Old Master did not have much of a reaction. After a moment of silence, he said, "You've worked hard." He did not ask the emaciated old man for any specifics, like evidence or motive. It was like no matter what the emaciated old man said, he would believe it. Outside the room, Linghai Wang felt increasingly curious. Just who was this emaciated old man? And just what was the Tang clan's torture hall? And why did the Tang old master trust him so much? The emaciated old man walked out of the old estate. As he watched him leave, Linghai Wang finally remembered who he was. His expression flickered as he asked, "You are Minister Wei?" And Lin's expression also instantly changed as she turned to look at the emaciated old man. The emaciated old man acted like he had not heard. His steps did not pause, and he quickly vanished into the snowstorm outside the old estate. Qin Changsheng did not know who Minister Wei was, but seeing Linghai Wang and Lin react so strongly, he thought to himself that he was probably an extraordinary person. But he had no chance to ask because right after the emaciated old man left, another person came to the old estate. Just like the emaciated old man's arrival, it was also silent. Neither the two prefects of the orthodoxy nor Qin Changsheng's group of three noticed. The person who had come was a blind zither player. The blind zither player paid no attention to the other people in the room, nor did he bow to Qin Changsheng. He directly said to the Tang old master, "That monster is hiding in second master's estate. It truly is of the Yellow Springs lineage and cultivates the techniques of the longevity sect. It's not a good thing." After a few moments of silence, the Tang old master said, "There's no reason why it can't stay." The meaning of these words was very clear. In the old master's view, since the blind zither player had taken action, no matter how troublesome that monster was, it could not escape. The blind zither player was quiet for a very long time, then said, "I found it somewhat unbearable." The Tang old master also felt somewhat sorrowful at these words. The matters of the past no longer exist. There's no need to remember them. The blind zither player replied, "That was the last strand of Junior Brother's soul. I always wanted it to last a little longer in this world." It took Qin Changsheng a few moments to understand the meaning of this conversation, and he was very shocked. Based on his judgment and analysis, Chusu was a descendant of the Yellow Springs, most likely the result of the corpse execution of the previous sect master of the longevity sect. This blind zither player said that it was the last strand of Junior Brother's soul. Did this mean that his junior brother was the previous sect master of the longevity sect? Didn't this mean that this blind zither player was that sect master's senior brother? Then he had an extremely high status in the longevity sect. Perhaps even the only elder of the previous generation. Such a person was actually hiding in the Tang clan as a guardian. Chapter 851. The blind zither player left the room, carrying the zither on his back. Lin had also recognized his identity. Her face slightly paled, but she said nothing, only bowed as a junior would. Linghai Zhihai had not yet recovered from his shock when he was shocked once more. The longevity sect was the ancestral hall of the southern faction of the orthodoxy. As archbishops of the orthodoxy, he and Lin naturally understood the longevity sect more than Qin Changsheng. They knew that this blind zither player had once been the longevity sect's grand elder. When Suli charged into the longevity sect alone, rivers of blood flowed by the cold pool and countless people died. The few elders who were still alive were actually just unremarkable second-generation elders at the time. The first-generation elders who could truly represent the longevity sect strength were all dead or injured. After an investigation, only two of the most powerful elders managed to escape the calamity because they were in secluded cultivation, but in the end, they also disappeared without a trace. Who could have expected that the longevity sect's grand elder would come to the Tang clan? Minister Wei was the Minister of Justice of the previous dynasty. Right now, he is in my clan's torture hall. The Tang old master said to Qin Changsheng when he was Minister Wei, Zhou Tong just happened to rise to power through the Mutuo clan case. Following the Empress's will, Zhou Tong became his disciple. Zhou Tong's later methods were all learned from him, but the two had different ideals. Minister Wei deeply disliked him, and even though Zhou Tong had the Divine Empress's support, he was still miserably dealt with by Minister Wei. Only later on did Emperor Xian go blind and the matters of the imperial court fall into the empress's hands. Only then did the situation reverse. Qin Changxing asked what happened. Minister Wei can probably be considered the first true prisoner of Zhou prison. The Tang Old Master did not get too specific, continuing, I invited Su Li to the capital to rescue him, and then Minister Wei remained in Wenshui City. After a moment of silence, Qin Changxing asked, and that person? The Tang Old Master replied, when Su Li went to the longevity sect, he gave me face and left 2 people alive. Qin Changxing had a rough understanding. Those 2 surviving elders were also currently in Wenshui City. One was the blind zither player from before, and the other was the old guardian in the ancestral hall. These are the favors I owe Su Li. He wanted me to promise him something, and today I have returned this favor. The Tang Old Master glanced at the old umbrella and said, It's the 2 hours you wanted. Qin Changxing thought of the senior that he hadn't seen for a long time and felt nostalgic. The Tang Old Master concluded, this favor arose because of the 3 of them, and when it comes time to return the favor, it will still be the 3 of them. It seems that everything is predestined. These words were his explanation for what had happened today, and, at the same time, he was killing time. The Tang Old Master and Qin Changxing were waiting for someone. The most important person, the Tang's second master. The Tang's second master brushed the snow off his shoulder and smiled at the Tang Old Master. How much did Old Master win in today's mahjong game? His expression was very natural, and his voice was very calm, just like every time he returned to the old house. He was still the sensible second son who was good at making the Old Master happy. But today, the Tang Old Master was not the only one in the old estate. Qin Changxing and the others were also present. I do indeed have an agreement with the longevity sect to kill Qin Changxing. The Tang's second master very calmly said, conspiring to kill the Pope sounds like a very heavy crime, but I do not believe that this is wrong. Yes, once this matter was known, he would assuredly be guilty, but from the standpoint of the Tang clan, it was not wrong. In the old estate in the snow, what they were discussing today was not crime, but right and wrong. This right and wrong was not right and wrong in the eyes of the common people, but right and wrong in the eyes of the Tang Old Master. Let alone him colluding with the longevity sect. In truth, many factions, including the Qiushan clan, wanted Qin Changxing dead. So what? Outside the room, Linghai Zhuang and Enlin had very solemn expressions, because it was obvious that the Tang Old Master agreed with his view. Attempting to kill Qin Changxing was not a big deal, even if it was rather troublesome to clean up now. Then what about poisoning the Tang First Master? The Tang Old Master also did not care. Just as he had said to Qin Changxing 2 hours ago, to the elders of his generation who had been deeply influenced by Emperor Taizong, as long as the Tang Second Master could ensure that the Tang clan did not fail or even advance to the next level, let alone poisoning his elder brother, even killing his own father was nothing to him. Qin Changxing asked, then how do you explain the Demon Lord replacing Chusu and appearing in the Mount Song Army headquarters? And what is your relationship with Shiwalao City? The room became extremely quiet, and the snowstorm outside seemed to grow louder, making one feel somewhat vexed. The Tang Old Master asked, causing so much noise in 2 hours, did Tang find out anything? The one to answer was the steward of the old estate. His expression was rather uneasy, apparently not having expected such a reply from the ancestral hall. First young master said at the very beginning that to prove second master's relationship with the demons was very simple. Only one sentence was needed. Oh, I'm very curious as to what sentence is needed to prove that my son is colluding with the demons. The Tang Old Master expressionlessly said. The steward raised his head to glance at the Tang Old Master. After a few moments of hesitation, he said, First young master said that there was no need for evidence, that it was up to one's heart to prove it. Old Master, if you are willing to believe that second master is innocent, then he is innocent. If you are not willing to believe second master, then you naturally know that he is not innocent. The room grew even quieter, and no one spoke for a very long time. No one understood his grandfather better than Tang 36. There was no need for evidence, no need for him or Chun Chongsheng to do anything. Everything was in the Tang old master's grasp. In the end, the only person who could make the decision was him, so what meaning was there in doing these things? The Tang's second master silently smiled, because he also had a deep understanding of his father. Then why did he cause so much trouble? The Tang old master asked. The steward's voice trembled as he replied. First young master said that he just found those elders to be an eyesore. In addition, if there's any filth in the residence that needs to be cleaned up, he would also clean it up. In addition, he wanted to burn down second master's favorite Tong cottage to make his heart ache. Hearing this, and thinking about that courtyard that had already been burned to the ground and could no longer be restored, the Tang's second master's lips twitched, and he found it impossible to maintain his smile. Should I believe you? The Tang old master asked his son. The Tang's second master calmly replied, Of course. The Tang old master looked into his eyes and asked, Then, what's going on with the Mount Song Army headquarters? The Tang's second master smiled. I did not make any agreement with Xiulao City, nor did I meet with anyone. It was just that Black Robe found me through the longevity sect. I knew what they wanted to do, so I made things convenient for them. Of course, at the time, I only thought that they wanted to kill Chun Chongsheng, not that their true target was the Demon Lord. Everyone present could tell that he was not lying, nor was he trying to conceal anything. If everything was really as he said, could the crime of colluding with the demons still stand? No one knew what others would think, but to the people in this room, it still stood because Zhishio replied, Making things convenient is out of the question. If you make things convenient for the demons, then you will make things very inconvenient for me. The room fell silent once more. Chapter 852. All of you didn't come to Wenshui City to investigate anything. You only wanted to use this matter to display your strength and shake my position in Father's heart. At present, the Li Palace does not support me. Holy Maiden Peak does not support me. Scholatry Manor does not support me. Mount Li does not support me. And now, even the Qiushan clan does not support me. You also say that I colluded with the demons and ruined my reputation. Even if I don't care and no one dares to mention it afterwards, Father will still have to consider these things. The Tang's second master turned to Qin Chongsheng and said, In truth, you're much smarter than the common people and believers believe you to be. And there's also Qiushan and that nephew of mine. Although you're young, your methods are truly not lacking. I consider myself to be shrewd and ruthless, but it seems that I truly have been forced into a rather sorry state by all of you. It will be rather troublesome to resolve the current situation. Qin Chongsheng asked, Can I understand this as you admitting to colluding with the demons? The Tang's second master laughed, but he still did not make a sound. Then his smile faded, and he looked at the crowd like they were idiots. I naturally won't admit to colluding with the demons, and even if I did, so what? Do all of you really think that you can exterminate the entire demon race? In the end, there will still be a truce. How can you obtain a lasting peace? It's just trade and exchange, and I'm just doing some work ahead of time. The crowd fell silent, the old estate once more falling silent. After some time, Chun Chongsheng said, Your view is actually reasonable, but in the current situation, your actions are wrong. What's wrong? My father taught us from childhood that the Tang clan is a merchant, and merchants are merchants. What we want is money. The Tang's second master mocked. Is there any kind of money that's even dirtier? At this moment, a voice rang out. There are times when merchants can't just be merchants. The speaker was the Tang old master. His gaze fell on the snowstorm outside the room, perhaps recalling that snowstorm in Luoyang many years ago. There are some things that you might be right to do several hundred years from now, but if you do them now, you are wrong. The Tang old master's words were the conclusion of this matter. It was obvious that the Tang's second master had not expected his father to say this. He calmly gazed at the Tang old master, not angry, not despairing, only gazing. Then he once more gave a noiseless laugh, still brimming with derision and malice, but this time it was tinged with exhaustion and relief. The conclusion had been made, so what would be the ending? What happened next was an internal affair of the Tang clan. Linghai Zhuang, Zhexiu, and the others withdrew from the old estate. Besides the Tang Old Master and his son, only Chun Changsheng remained. The Tang Old Master looked at the Tang Second Master and said, "When you were little, I said many things to the two of you, some of which you still remember to this day, such as the words you said just now. Then do you still remember what I once said to the two of you? Why has the Tang clan, the Qiushan clan, the Wu clan, and the Mutuo clan been able to continue for so many years, never once having their path broken?" The Tang's second master gazed out at the snowstorm and said, "Because our clans have never experienced internal strife." The Tang Old Master did not care that his back was to him. Correct, for clans like ours, no matter how great the storm is outside, we don't need to care, but if it begins to rot from within, then it's very dangerous. Think of those clans of Tianliang County, at their peak like blazing suns in the sky, but now they're all gradually withering away. Only the Chan clan sits on the imperial throne, but because of internal strife, they've almost been exterminated several times. Thus, our four clans are the most wary of this matter, and have thought of countless methods. I once believed that my method was correct. Before Brother Tang took charge of the clan, I would not allow any of your branches to have descendants, so as to cut off your thoughts, and also cut off any spying gazes that might be cast upon you. The Tang's second master turned to his father and expressionlessly said, "But did Sir ever think that this is very unfair to us?" "Correct, it truly is very unfair, but right now, you have no right to say this." The Tang Old Master also expressionlessly said, "Because I later changed my mind and wanted to pass the clan to you. You now have descendants, so I don't understand why you still poisoned your elder brother." The Tang's second master remained silent, saying nothing. The Tang Old Master continued, "Of course, it doesn't matter even if I poisoned him. Just as you said, our Tang clan is a merchant. For the sake of money, what can't we do?" The Tang's second master knew that his father had not finished speaking, so he still maintained his silence. "But you were in too much of a hurry." The Tang Old Master looked at him and sincerely said, "Before doing these things, did you ever ask me a single question? Did you even try to test my feelings?" The Tang's second master could no longer maintain his silence, because he truly wanted to laugh. Thus, he laughed and asked, "Was there a need?" Perhaps it was his attitude or his words that infuriated him, but the Tang Old Master's face instantly chilled as he harshly rebuked, "What do you think? Is this your Tang clan or my Tang clan? In the future, it will assuredly be your Tang clan, but right now, it is still mine. Since it is my Tang clan, what right do you have to hide it from me and do so many things?" The Tang's second master calmly gazed at him. After a very long time, he finally mocked. As expected, it was hard to tell if he was mocking himself or mocking the world. The Tang Old Master asked, "What did you say?" "It's useless to say anything, because it's all fake. Father, what you need is not reason, only reverence. You only want to maintain your mysteriousness, hiding in the old estate every day and playing mahjong. Naturally, these sons and stewards will help you manage the family business. If they do well, they'll be praised, but if they do badly, they'll be thrown away like a rag." The Tang's second master looked at his father and sorrowfully said, "Yes, besides caring about whether the Tang clan is your Tang clan or not, what else do you need to care about?" The Tang Old Master slightly narrowed his eyes. "That's because you've done things that I cannot tolerate." "Cannot tolerate?" The Tang's second master suddenly raised his voice. "Didn't you just say that as long as the family business did not fail, it didn't matter if you were poisoned to death?" The Tang Old Master expressionlessly replied, "I can say this, but you can't do this. Don't you understand this?" The Tang's second master coldly replied, "Because I'm too ruthless? Principal Shang thinks highly of me and is willing to use the power of the imperial court to support me. Isn't it precisely because I'm very similar to you, both so ruthless?" The Tang Old Master narrowed his eyes even more. After a moment of silence, he said, "Today, you have disappointed me the most with these words." The Tang's second master's face was brimming with derision, but he did not reply. The Tang Old Master continued, "I have known Shang for several centuries, and we are truly kindred spirits. I know of his strength, his mental strength, and when you said these words, it meant that you had already mentally submitted to him. The Tang clan can only cooperate with him. If this continues, you will bring the Tang clan to its grave." The Tang's second master's eyes also narrowed at these words. "Then what about you? Did you really think about handing the Tang clan to me?" His voice also sank, but it was not calm, as if it contained many years of hatred. "Yes, in these 3 years, you thought about it. But in the end, you made up your mind because I used poison to cripple Big Brother, because that grandson you placed such high hopes on was stupid enough to insist on standing on Qin Changsheng's side. You were forced to choose me." The Tang Old Master asked, "If I don't give this clan to you, who can I give it to? Who can I give it to?" The Tang's second master crazily laughed, a rare sound escaping his lips. "Ha ha ha! Who can I give it to?" He angrily yelled. "Did you really think that I didn't know that that fellow came to the old estate 3 days ago? Did you tell me about this? No, because you were afraid that I and the imperial court would move against him, because this is Wenshu city. You still hold out hope for him, right? After all these years, you still think that I'm inferior to him, right? But don't forget that his surname is Wang, not Tang. Just who is your son?" Chapter 853. Qin Changsheng had said nothing this entire time, only quietly listened. The conversation between the Tang Old Master and his son had not been concealed from him. Thus, he had heard many secrets, not the actual secrets of the Tang clan, but the secrets in the depths of the hearts of this father and son. He was particularly shocked at the last few words, but this did not mean that he was completely ignorant of this matter. In truth, the person that the Tang's second master hated and envied had appeared at the old estate 3 days ago at his request. "Since you know that he has also come, what chance do you have?" the Tang Old Master asked. The Tang's second master regained his composure and indifferently said, "He is not willing to change his surname, so he has no right to manage the matters of my Tang clan." The Tang Old Master expressionlessly asked, "And if I had to manage it?" After a few moments of silence, the Tang's second master replied, "I asked someone to delay him outside. He can't come." The Tang Old Master asked, "Even so, what else can you do?" The Tang's second master calmly replied, "I can't do much, but I can at least kill that good nephew of mine." He was too calm when he said this, as if he was speaking of a very ordinary matter. Thus, neither Qin Changsheng nor the Tang Old Master immediately reacted. "If Brother Tang dies, Father, besides me, you have no other choice." This time, the Tang Old Master and Qin Changsheng clearly heard his words, and then simultaneously thought of a story in the Taoist canon. This story was too old and had no evidence. It was more like a legend, a myth. It was said that in ancient times, there was once an abnormally powerful empire. One day, while the emperor was inspecting the front lines, he suddenly died of illness. The accompanying empress and crown prince were stranded in the wilderness by a torrential downpour, and the prince that remained in the capital, with the support of his sister and the ministers, forged a posthumous edict and ascended to the throne first, plunging the empire into internal strife. At that moment, all the countries of the world began to wage war against that empire, and the situation became extremely dangerous. Several dozen days later, the empress and the crown prince returned to the capital under the protection of an appointed minister. The princess and the ministers who supported the new emperor expressed that they were willing to pay a sufficient price for this matter. They hoped that the two sides could put aside their former enmity and unite all forces to resist the external invaders. At that time, the power of a new emperor was still strong. For the sake of the overall situation, this seemed to be the only way out. However, the minister did not think so. Early that morning, during the court meeting, the appointed minister directly beheaded the new emperor with a single stroke of his sword. Then he told the princess and the ministers loyal to the new emperor that there was only one emperor in the empire now. "Do you not know what kind of future you should choose for the empire? Then I'll help you eliminate one of the alternatives. That way, you won't need to be anxious and tormented, because the only choice was the best choice." Note, this story comes from an awesome novel called Nightfall. But please understand, This doesn't mean that the story of night conquering happened before the book of choosing heaven. I can clearly say that it's not like that. It's just that I've been watching night conquering again recently, and I can't help but want to write about it for fun. At this moment, the Tang's second master's words and what he was about to do were in a certain sense the same as that myth mentioned in the Taoist canon. If Tang 36 died, what other choice did the Tang Old Master have? Of course, he first had to do what he said. The Tang Old Master stared into the Tang's second master's eyes and asked, "Do you think you have the ability?" The Tang's second master thought about the reports he had received, the scene in the granary, and the five-kind man by the riverbank, somewhat absent-minded. Yes, only today did I realize that I had never truly understood my own clan. He looked at his father and said, "The Tang clan is just like Sir, still an old well with no bottom. But I'm still a member of the Tang clan, so I am well aware that there are no arrangements in the ancestral hall. As long as my people go, they will definitely be able to kill him." He then turned to Qin Changsheng and said, "Of course, I also have to thank Your Holiness the Pope for coming. Wenshui City has already been tense for 2 days, and today's chaos is Your Holiness's handiwork. But the more chaotic it is, the easier it is for me to take advantage of the chaos to arrange a few things." Qin Changsheng said nothing, only stood up. The Tang Old Master looked at the Tang's second master and asked, "Do you think that you can still move people?" Today's events had already proved that the Tang clan was still the Tang Old Master's Tang clan. No matter how many years the Tang second master had operated in secret, as long as the Tang Old Master gave the word, those subordinates who were normally loyal and devoted to the Tang second master would still not dare to take a single step, not even dare to breathe loudly. If it were a person of the Tang clan, I naturally wouldn't be able to move them. The Tang's second master calmly said, "Fortunately, Principal Shang gave me a group of excellent assassins." Which faction did the best assassins of the continent belong to? The former Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. The majority of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets was now in the possession of the Tang clan, but the powers of the dark were in the hands of the Imperial Court. To put it more accurately, the terrifying powers of the dark were currently being handled by the Monastery of Eternal Spring in Luoyang. These were naturally secrets, but they could not be concealed from the Tang Old Master and Qin Changsheng. Thus, they knew that the Tang second master was not lying, nor was he bluffing. If the assassins of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had taken advantage of the chaos to infiltrate Wenshui City and were already in the ancestral hall, Qin Changsheng walked out of the room. The Tang's second master looked at him and said, "It's too late." Qin Changsheng stopped his steps. The old estate was quiet, almost deathly still. No one had expected the Tang's second master to use such a thunderous move. Now that he thought about it, his silence, his lack of ability, had naturally been a feint to make the Tang clan's old estate and the orthodoxy lower their guard. The Tang Old Master's eyes were abnormally deep and serene. Perhaps it was because he knew that his grandson really would die this time. The Tang clan's guardian was still in the ancestral hall, but the Tang second master had not even mentioned it. The Tang Old Master was well aware of what this meant. The Tang's second master gazed at Qin Changsheng's back and said, "Your Holiness the Pope, you might also die today. Have you mentally prepared yourself?" If Tang 36 died, Qin Changsheng would assuredly think of a way to kill the Tang second master. The Tang Old Master, who had no other choice, could only stand on his son's side. A war was certain to break out between the Orthodoxy and the Tang clan. So what would the Tang Old Master do? The answer was obvious without even asking. Wang Pu stood on Chicken Crowing Mountain outside Wenshui City for 3 days. The wind and snow had arrived, and he was an old friend. It was not that he was afraid to enter because he was too close. 3 days ago, he had entered the city, gone to the old estate, and had a long conversation with the Tang Old Master. But he had failed to convince him. If he had failed to convince him, what else could he do? Was he really going to draw his blade against him at the slightest disagreement? The Tang Old Master had coldly watched the world for several centuries. Even his own sons were extremely callous, but he treated Wang Pu extremely well. No matter what, he could not attack the Tang Old Master. Of course, even if he did attack, he might not be a match for the Tang Old Master. Even didn't know how deep the well in the old house was. But by standing outside the city, he was showing his support for Chun Changsheng like a guard. But even as he sensed the activity in the old estate and saw the faint disturbance in the ancestral hall, he still did not descend the mountain, because 2 sedan chairs had arrived at Chicken Crowing Mountain. Chapter 854. A Taoist nun sat in one of the palanquins, a horsetail whisk resting on the crook of her left arm. This horsetail whisk had clearly been repaired in the last 2 years and was very new. The Taoist nun's brows were not like old He's, but they always gave off an aged and heavy feeling. Moreover, they had a strange and loathsome temperament. Wang loathed her. If not for her husband, he would have cut off one of her arms 2 years ago. Of course, other than a person like Wang Pe, no one dared to show any loathing towards this Taoist nun. This was because this Taoist nun had an extremely ruthless temper, because this Taoist nun was called Wuqiong by one of the previous storms of the 8 directions, an expert of the divine domain. There was no one in the other palanquin. The person who had been sitting in the palanquin was now standing at Wang Po's side. It was a very fat middle-aged man, dressed in bright yellow clothes. The fat on his abdomen drooped down from his belt, making him look rather comical. But no one dared to make fun of him, because he was the Prince of Xiang, the most powerful prince of the great Zhou imperial court, supported by countless soldiers and ministers. And not too long ago, he had finally broken through that threshold, becoming the first true expert of the Chan imperial clan to enter the divine domain after Emperor Xian. As for the latter matter, not many people knew about it until today. Only when he came from the capital to Wenshui City, ascended the palanquin to Chicken Crowing Mountain, walked to Wang Po's side, and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Wang Po replied, "I didn't expect it." The Prince of Xiang sighed, "I also didn't expect it." The snowstorm enveloped Wenshui City, as well as the ancestral hall. The black eaves of the houses were covered in snow, their whiteness pleasing to the eye. However, the white walls did not get whiter. On the contrary, the snow in the courtyard made them seem rather gray. In this intermittent, sometimes dense, sometimes sparse snowstorm, the light shining down from the sky constantly changed, sometimes dark and sometimes bright. In this gap between light and darkness, many figures appeared in the snowstorm. These assassins wore white clothes and had their faces covered. Just like the snowstorm, they exuded a chill that made them very difficult to discover. They had been discovered by Tang 36 the moment they appeared, but that was because they did not care about being discovered. Tang 36 narrowed his eyes. The cold wind blew on his face, but it didn't cool him down. His greasy hair floated up because he hadn't washed it for a long time. He didn't feel good because the scene wasn't beautiful enough and because the smell was bad. He looked at the white-clothed assassins in the courtyard of the ancestral hall and scratched his head. "So many of you are ganging up on me? It's so unfair." The white-clothed assassins naturally wouldn't answer him. They just looked at him expressionlessly. Tang 36 raised his head to look at the old guardian. He was now sitting on the futon, and the patron was standing beside him. If he wished to see the patron's face more clearly, he had to raise his head high. You could say that he was like a duck waiting to be slaughtered, or he could say that he was a proud goose. Yes, no matter how cold and terrifying the auras of these assassins who had infiltrated the ancestral hall were, they were no match for the old guardian. However, these assassins obviously didn't care, and their gazes only fell on him, so there was only one explanation. Where did the Tang's second master's confidence in killing Tang 36 come from? Because this old consecrator in the ancestral hall was one of his people. The old guardian said, "My apologies, young master." Tang 36 smiled. "Hug your mother's apologies." The old guardian raised his right hand and slapped it down on his head. The wind and snow suddenly picked up, and the candles in the depths of the ancestral hall fiercely swayed. The first few rows were extinguished, and tinsel memorial tablets tumbled down from the shelves, shattering into pieces on the ground. Tang 36 moved. The futon beneath him shattered into countless pieces, and a poisonous smoke rose into the air. He scrambled and crawled towards the snow-covered courtyard. It was obvious that the ancestral hall had no defenses of the Tang clan, but he had made his preparations. But he had not expected that the person who wanted to kill him would be a guardian of the Tang clan. The poisonous smoke in the futon was naturally very formidable, but how could it poison his foe to death? The old guardian had once been an elder of the longevity sect. His true essence was extremely deep, and he had long since reached the peak of star condensation, half a step from the divine. Let alone Tang, 36, who was only at the initial level of star condensation. Even if he suddenly exploded with 10 times his strength, how could he block this explosive strike? He frantically crawled into the courtyard. But how could he escape the range of the palm wind? The old guardian's palm descended like a mountain. The wind and snow in the courtyard of the ancestral hall seemed to be drawn in by some invisible force. The wind stilled, and the falling snow suddenly slowed. The old guardian's palm was just about to land on Tang 36's head. Suddenly, the wind in the courtyard stirred once more, and snowflakes began to fall. A sword glow appeared in the snowstorm. This sword glow was extremely bright, illuminating the winter-sweet stools and the eyes of the assassins in the courtyard. This sword glow was both bright and sinister. It had restrained all its chi, as if it had been stained by 100-some days of fallen leaves and dust, becoming one with the ancestral hall. The snowflakes falling from the sky suddenly turned red. They had been dyed red by blood. An expression of disbelief appeared on the old guardian's face. The wind from the palm howled. The sword glow silently advanced. All the candles in the ancestral hall were instantly extinguished. The numerous memorial tablets toppled to the ground. Countless palm prints and sword slashes appeared on the pillars and walls. With a light swish, the ancestral hall returned to silence. The old guardian stood on the stone steps in front of the ancestral hall. His left palm had been run through by a sword, blood flowing from it. A deep wound had also appeared on the left side of his chest, blood gradually seeping out of it. His right palm had overlapped with his opponent's left palm. His opponent was a man dressed in the clothes of a servant. This man was very ordinary, with nothing special about him. In the last 5 years, this man's shoulders had always drooped, just like Wang Puan chicken crowing mountain outside the city. But today, it was different because his left wrist all the way to his shoulder had been shattered by the old guardian's palm. Who was this person that had managed to fight the Tang clan's old guardian to the point where both sides were heavily injured? Even if it was a sneak attack, it was still hard to believe. The old guardian faintly remembered this person. He was probably the mute servant in the ancestral hall. He naturally knew now that this person was no ordinary mute servant. And this person was not an expert of the Tang clan arranged by the old master, because he knew all the secrets of the Tang clan. Then, just who was this expert that had pretended to be a mute servant and swept the courtyard of the Tang clan's ancestral hall for half a year? To be able to successfully ambush an expert half a step from the divine meant that he was an extremely specialized assassin, and his cultivation was assuredly about the same. Peak star condensation? In the present world, there was only one assassin of this level. The old guardian knew his opponent's identity, and his pupils constricted as he shouted, "Attack!" These words were naturally meant for the white-clothed assassins. But at this crucial moment, he had forgotten a very important matter. The white-clothed assassins charged at Tang 36 in the courtyard, their sword intense, swift, and sinister, countless times colder than the snow in the depths of winter, causing one to shiver in fear. Countless cold sword glows appeared in the drifting snow, and then came the sounds of sharp blades piercing through flesh and groans. The blood sprinkled on the snow in the courtyard was particularly dazzling. Several assassins lay in pools of blood, no longer breathing. These assassins were very skilled and vigilant, but they had never imagined that the sneak attack would come from their companions. The swift and sinister sword intent enveloped the courtyard of the Tang clan's ancestral hall. The mute servant retreated into the courtyard. The 7 white-clothed assassins walked to his side. Chapter 855. Seeing this, the old deacon felt a tinge of regret. He had already guessed at the identity of the mute servant, But he had never imagined that these assassins were once subordinates of the envoy of heavenly secrets. The old guardian took in a deep breath and shouted to the mute servant, "Lu Qing, come and fight." He was truly worthy of being an expert half a step from the divine. Even though he had been heavily injured by the sneak attack, his voice was still thunderous and dignified. The cold winter wind blew through his hair in a frenzy. Yes, the mute servant was Lu Qing, once the leader of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets assassin organization. After Su Li and that mysterious assassin vanished, he became the continent's most frightening assassin. Only he could successfully launch a sneak attack on such a powerful individual, but he had also paid a heavy price. Tang 36 stood up and asked Lu Qing, "Are you all right?" Lu Qing said nothing, only expressionlessly nodded his head. "Fight your ass. Fight." Tang 36 brushed off the snow on his body and looked at the blood-soaked old guardian. "Now it's our turn to gang up on you." After saying this, he high-spiritedly waved his hand. Lu Qing and the 7 assassins charged up the stone steps. At the same time, the gate to the ancestral hall was pushed open, allowing even more people to surge in. Fierce and sinister sword intents would occasionally leave marks on the walls of the ancestral hall. Crossbow bolts and hidden weapons whimpered in the snowstorm. Blood was everywhere, and it seemed like the white walls needed to be painted again. After some time, the cacophony finally died down and the ancestral hall regained its peace. It was so quiet that one could hear the snowflakes falling to the ground and the panting of the crowd. There was blood everywhere. Everyone was injured. Tang 36 was no exception. He had 2 broken ribs. In order to attract the old guardian's attention, he did not permit himself to retreat to the back. The facts proved that his method was effective. Not a single person in the encirclement had died. The old guardian was dead, leaning against the incense burner table in the ancestral hall. His body was covered in wounds, his blood already drained. He looked abnormally wretched. His eyes were still open, and one could faintly see regret and frustration in them. The people who came to help were all from the Tang family. In this half a year, no more stones were thrown into the wall, and no kites flew through the sky. But since the mute servant was Lu Qing, Tang 36 naturally kept in close contact with the eldest branch. The houses near the ancestral hall were already under the control of the chief branch. They were just waiting for the moment to strike. But Tang 36 really didn't expect that the old master would become second uncle's man. If not for Lu Qing being here today, he would have died without a doubt. Tang 36 ordered the people of the eldest branch to leave the ancestral hall. He looked at Lu Qing and said, "Brother Idol, you've worked hard these past 6 months." When he had gone to Mount Han to participate in the Boiling Stone Summit, he had seen this legendary assassin for the first time. At that time, Lu Qing wanted Chen Changsheng to be the new leader of the assassin organization. Of course, Chen Changsheng didn't agree. Tang 36 really wanted to get Lu Qing's contact information. Chen Changsheng clearly knew what he was planning, so he didn't agree. But after Tang 36 was imprisoned in the ancestral hall, the situation changed. Chen Changsheng's thoughts were naturally different. As a result, Tang 36 and Lu Qing got in touch. Lu Qing expressionlessly said, "I'm just taking money to do my job." Tang 36 suddenly asked, "Do you have any thoughts of becoming a guardian of my Tang clan?" Lu Qing glanced at him and said, "Wait until you become clan head." In this half year, in order to protect Tang 36, Lu Qing had pretended to be a mute servant in the ancestral hall, so he naturally couldn't speak. Whether in front of or behind others, in front of or behind the courtyard, in his solitary room, or even after he slept, he didn't say a single word. This was not an easy thing to do. It was also from that day onwards that Tang 36 stopped speaking. Some members of the Tang clan believed that he was like this out of despair, while others believed that this was a silent resistance. No one knew that he just wanted a period of quiet reflection and to accompany Lu Qing. Tang 36 turned to those injured assassins and said, "After I become clan head, I will take care of you for the rest of your lives." These assassins had originally belonged to the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, but now they were subjects of the imperial court. Today, they had acted on Lu Qing's orders, which was tantamount to treason and would assuredly invite the full pursuit of the imperial court. Although they were used to living in the dark, if they were to live like this for many years, who would be willing to become a wandering ghost? Tang 36's words were very direct. Although it seemed rather distant, it was still a promise. The assassins nodded to him, looked at Lu Qing, and then vanished into the snowstorm. Lu Qing asked Tang 36, "What do we do next?" Tang 36 gazed at the closed gate of the ancestral hall. After a few moments of silence, he said, "Wait." Lu Qing glanced at him, said nothing, and also left the ancestral hall. Everyone dispersed. There was only him in the ancestral hall, as well as the corpses strewn all over the ground. He walked to the stone steps, moved the old guardian's corpse away from the incense table, and took a new prayer mat from under the table. The snowstorm silently descended upon the courtyard. He sat on the prayer mat, gazing at the snowy landscape outside the door, his expression calm as he waited for the final conclusion. News of what had happened in the ancestral hall quickly reached the old estate. Chun Changsheng gazed at the snowy landscape outside the door, the expression on his face gradually relaxing. He was like a winter sweet struggling free of the thick snow, radiating a delightful luster. The steward of the old estate looked at the Tang's second master, lowered his head, and said, "Eldest young master has a message for second master." The Tang's second master said nothing. He gazed at the scattered tablets on the table, seemingly thinking of something. The Tang old master asked, "What witty words does this child want to say?" Hearing this, Chun Changsheng turned to glance at the Tang old master. From this form of address, it was obvious that the old master's attitude toward Tang 36 had already changed. No one knew the exact details of the assassination in the ancestral hall, but it was assuredly bloody and cruel. Everyone, including the Tang old master, believed that Tang 36 would be killed by the Tang's second master. Although Chun Changsheng knew that Lu Qing had been at Tang 36's side this entire time, he still felt that the situation was extremely dangerous. But the outcome of the assassination in the ancestral hall was completely different from what everyone had expected. The steward whispered, "Eldest young master said that assassins are only useful if you raise them yourself. In the end, what others give you is not your own, just like ability." These words were rather confusing. Just what sort of ability was it referring to? Others might not understand, but the Tang's second master could. Knowing the outcome of the ancestral hall, no matter how shocked he was, he still maintained a calm expression. But now, upon hearing Tang 36's words, he could no longer maintain his composure, his face instantly paling. No matter how intelligent or skilled one was in scheming, if one's own strength was insufficient and one could only use others to do things for one, problems would arise sooner or later. He thought of the words Wang Pa had said on the snowy street 3 years ago, and the words Jiaxiu had said in the Taoist church 2 days ago. He couldn't help but become somewhat absent-minded, thinking, have I really been wrong all these years? Minister Wei did not come. The ones who came were those bashful youths from the torture chamber. The Tang's second master had been taken away. No one knew where he would be imprisoned, when he would once more appear before the eyes of the world. Or perhaps he would die tonight. It was just like the words the old guardian had thought of when he saw Tang 36 in the ancestral hall. The Tang clan walked the path of merchants. The winner would take all, while the loser would leave nothing behind. This was how it was. It was also like the words that Tang 36 had brought to the Tang old master. Free evaluation of one's heart. There was no need for any evidence, and there had never been any true reasoning. Chapter 856. Chun Changsheng and the Orthodoxy returned to the Taoist church. The snowstorm did not stop, continuing for an entire night. He had also waited for an entire night. There was no sign of activity from the Tang clan, no sign of unrest. In the last 3 years, the Tang's second master had managed the clan's business and internal affairs. He was unquestionably the most important person in the city, but his disappearance seemed to have no effect on the city. This proved once more that Wenshui City would forever be the Tang clan's city, and the Tang clan would forever be managed by the Tang old master. What made Qin Changsheng and the orthodoxy uneasy was that after an entire night, the gate to the ancestral hall remained tightly shut. Tang 36 had still not been released. When the first ray of dawn fell on the Wenshui River, the last snowflake also fell, and then the snow stopped. The cessation of the snowstorm was so sudden that no one was mentally prepared. It was like the Tang clan's old estate had delivered a letter to the Taoist church. The streets of the city were covered in a thick layer of snow, reflecting the warm red glow of the morning sun and looking like a burning meadow. Qin Changsheng and the Orthodoxy's party once more arrived outside the old estate. This time, the treatment he received was much grander than yesterday. The Tang old master was personally waiting for him in the courtyard. I should have gone to the Taoist church to pay my respects to His Holiness the Pope, but this cold has yet to recover, and this old man's body is unbearable, the Tang old master said to Qin Changsheng. There was no sincerity in his expression or tone. Of course, there was no need for sincerity. Both sides knew that this was just an act for others to see. Qin Changsheng followed up by asking, "How is the chief branch's illness?" The illness here was naturally poison. The Tang old master replied, "Yesterday, someone went to the longevity sect to invite an expert to treat him." The treatment here was naturally referring to the fact that the Tang clan had already confirmed that the longevity sect had the antidote. With the Tang clan's abilities, it was naturally possible to obtain it. Qin Changsheng finally relaxed at these words. Although the Yellow Springs poison in Chusa's body could not poison him or Nank, he and Nank were not confident that they could expel the poison from someone else's body. As they spoke, the two entered the room. With all gazes cut off on the outside, there was naturally no need for hypocritical pleasantries, and they directly entered the main topic. It would naturally be best if the antidote could be found, but it doesn't matter even if it couldn't. If one dies, then one dies. The Tang old master indifferently said. Second brother also did not understand this point. Even if he had killed Brother Tang yesterday, I would not have chosen him. This was because he had many sons, and he should still be able to live for decades, or even centuries. He still had time to educate and nurture a qualified successor to the family head. Qin Changsheng did not believe the Tang old master's words. If Tang 36 had really been killed yesterday, the Tang clan would assuredly face the counterattack of Qin Changsheng and the Orthodoxy. Even if it was to obtain the support of Shang Xingzhou and the imperial court, he would still push the Tang second master to the position of clan head. But Qin Changsheng understood why the Tang old master had said this. The Tang old master wanted him to know that in yesterday's situation, he could refuse to give the Tang clan to the second branch, but in today's situation, he could still refuse to give it to the chief branch. Because the relationship between Qin Changsheng and Tang 36 was too close, the relationship between the chief branch and the orthodoxy had always been too close. The Tang old master had abolished the second master's position as clan head, but he still chose to stand on the side of Shang Xingzhou and the imperial court. He looked at Qin Changsheng and asked, "Do you not understand why I so firmly support your master?" Qin Changsheng thought of the dog he had seen on the street yesterday morning. After a moment of silence, he said, "I can roughly understand, because you too walk the same path. You use the word walk the same path very well, because many years ago, after the siege of Luoyang was lifted, I, your master Shang, and he truly did walk the same path back to the capital." The Tang old master gazed at the well in the courtyard, his gaze falling on the snow on the edge of the well. In those few years, I was traveling the world, but when they found out that I was the young master of the Tang clan, whether it was the previous dynasty, the Taoist sect, or those rebellious princes, none of them dared to show me the slightest disrespect. I simply didn't have the chance to experience the dangers of the world. I originally believed that the affairs of the world were just like this. Even if some people lived more difficult lives, what did that have to do with me? In the end, I was that noble young master that no one dared to provoke, but who could have expected that Luoyang would be besieged by the demons for 3 whole months, countless tragedies. In the end, who would care that you were the young master of the Tang clan? The Tang old master slightly narrowed his eyes, the occasional wrinkle at the corner of his eyes tinged with self-mockery, but even more with pain. The flames of war raged for 3 months, and even the red falcons used to carry messages in Luoyang had been stealthily slaughtered and eaten by some expert, so there was no hope that there would be any tree bark left. The demons raped, killed, and pillaged outside the city, while the scattered human soldiers went crazy from despair within the city. The demons ate people on the 2 shores of the Wei River, and the people of Luoyang also ate people. White bones littered the waters. Even though he was a cold-hearted person, he did not want to recall those scenes from back then. Of course, he was even less willing to see those scenes reappear before his eyes. So, can't fall into disorder. These are the 3 words that I care about the most in my life. Exterminating the demons is the thing that I want to accomplish the most in my life. The Tang clan is strong enough and has the right to choose. So how should I choose between the orthodoxy and the imperial court? I choose the strongest side. What is strong? Besides whose fist is bigger, it also depends on whose fist is steadier. The Tang old master looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "Your fist is still not big enough, and as for steadier, you're far lacking compared to your teacher." Chun Changsheng knew that this was the Tang old master's final stance, so he made no further comment. I have nothing else to say. I just want to take him away. I originally came to Wenshui to take him away, not to convince the Tang clan to change its mind. That day in the Taoist church, he had said the same thing to the Tang second master. But the Tang second master did not believe him and responded with a soundless and mocking smile. The Tang old master's insight was far superior to his son's, so he could naturally tell that Qin Changsheng was speaking from the bottom of his heart. The entire matter was just this simple, and the way young people did things was just this simple. The Tang old master recalled those interesting things that had happened countless years ago when he and Shang Yuzhou had left Luoyang, and he fell silent for a very long time. Almost everyone in his generation was now dead, and even he and Shang Xingzhou were getting on in years, but they had still been young. I promise you. The Tang old master looked at him and said, "Now that I think about it, he should already be out." Wenshui City was much livelier today than it had been a few days ago. The Tang second master had been imprisoned somewhere, and the second branch had lost power. The accounts were being checked and purged at the same time, but the shops along the street were already open for business, and the number of pedestrians had increased. The main street in front of the ancestral hall was even noisier. The stewards and shopkeepers of the Tang clan's main branch, as well as the servants, were guarding Madame Tang as they waited outside the gate. Suddenly, the heavy wooden gate of the ancestral hall slowly opened. Tang 36 walked out from within. Just like when he walked out of the mausoleum of books many years ago, his hair disheveled and his face dirty, his body covered in dust, his body much thinner, as if he had suffered a great deal. But his eyes were even brighter, his expression much calmer, his temperament much more composed. Madame Tang's eyes became slightly moist as she gazed at her son. She forcefully suppressed her emotions, not daring to cry. What happened next proved to the crowd that he was still the Tang 36 of the past. Regardless of the fact that after being imprisoned in the ancestral hall for half a year, his expression and temperament were very different from before. He asked the crowd, "Where's that old bastard?" Tang 36 has finally left the ancestral hall, and Lord Threadhead has also gotten married. Glancing at the wedding photo, the bride is truly beautiful. It truly makes one angry. I wish you all the best for your white hair. Chapter 857. All of Wenshui City had been stunned by these words. It was absolutely quiet outside the ancestral hall, as quiet as a tomb. After a while, someone finally awoke from their daze. Madame Tang concealed the fear in her eyes and quickly walked up to him, raising her hand and preparing to strike. A resounding slap might be able to make the old master not so angry when he hears of this matter. With this thought, Madame Tang clenched her teeth and struck, not wanting to soften her hand out of regret, and thus be seen through. She used a great deal of strength. Tang 36 smiled at her, not dodging. With a slap, Madame Tang's palm landed on Tang 36's face with a crisp sound. The left side of Tang 36's face began to visibly redden, but because he had not washed his face for many days, it was covered in dust and dirt, so it was not too conspicuous. But his face still carried a smile, one that was very sincere, without the slightest reluctance or emotion. Madame Tang froze, then reproached with remorse, "Why didn't you dodge? Your child has been unfilial. In this half-year, I've made Madame worry, and I haven't been able to serve at father's bedside. I deserve to be hit." Tang 36 stepped forward and embraced his mother, softly saying, "Go home first and wait for me. I still have some things to do." After half a year, Madame Tang could not bear to see him again. But she knew that the Pope was in the old estate at this time, so what her son wanted to do was assuredly important and could not be stopped. "At least go home and wash up and eat some food. I've already had the small kitchen prepare your favorite egg rice." Madame Tang looked at his clearly thinner face and said in heartache, "In this half-year in the ancestral hall, no one dared to short me on food and drink. Even if I was greedy, your son is used to eating in the kitchen of the old estate." Tang 36 looked into his mother's eyes and smiled. "Once that matter is finished, everyone can relax a little." After saying this, he turned to the crowd on the street. The stewards and shopkeepers of the chief branch and the several dozen maids were all overjoyed. As for those maids and grannies that had personally served him for many years, they were already tearing up. "What are you crying for? Do you really think that you're made of water?" He looked at the maids and said, "Hurry and arrange for this young master to wash." Hearing these words, the shopkeepers and stewards couldn't help but recall that scene from many years ago in Wenshui City. They wondered if that scene was going to reappear today. His expression could not help but become extremely interesting. The maids voiced their assent in unison. A servant who was used to this kind of work unloaded a dozen or so expensive rolls of variegated silk from the carriage, as well as a variety of wooden sticks. Before long, a space of several zhang in circumference was carved out with curtains in front of the ancestral hall's door. Those extremely capable maidservants unceremoniously knocked on, or rather smashed open, a neighboring shop and skillfully took out all the hot water that was prepared in the workshop in the backyard of the shop. Those maidservants had already taken out wooden buckets and all kinds of toiletries from their own carriages and hurriedly rushed to the curtain. Tang 36 had already walked into the curtain and stripped off all his clothes. Hot mist rose, and one could vaguely see the silhouette of a person. The sound of water was extremely clear. The young girls in the city blushed and turned around, but they couldn't help looking back from time to time. Mrs. Tang sighed helplessly, but her face was full of gratification. The stewards and shopkeepers, as well as the onlookers, were shocked speechless at first. Then they all laughed. It had truly been many years since they had seen this sort of scenery in Wenshui City. It didn't take long for the curtain to be taken down. That thin and haggard young man with disheveled hair and dirty face had now transformed into an elegant and noble young master. The eyes of the young girls on the street became incomparably bright. A maid came up to him with a sword in her hands and carefully tied it around his waist. This sword seemed rather ancient, but when tied to his body, it seemed like it had just been washed, its sharpness threatening. It was the Wenshui sword. Tang 36, wearing his cloud-ascending boots and the Wenshui sword at his waist, left the ancestral hall and went to the old estate. The crowd stopped at a distance on the street. No one dared to follow. He didn't even glance at the tablets left behind by past emperors and popes, and he certainly didn't pay any attention to that extremely humble steward. He pushed open the door to the old estate and walked in, as natural as returning home. In truth, this place had always been his home. He had lived here for many years. In all of Wenshui City, no one was more familiar with this place than him except the old master. Upon entering the small courtyard of the old estate, he began to greet people, greeting them like a master. He patted Linghai Zhiwang on the shoulder and said, "You've come." He then asked Archbishop Enlin, "Are you used to living here?" He froze at the sight of Nank, then turned to the steward and said, "Why aren't you quickly taking out grandfather's best tea leaves to brew? What are you standing around for? Do you know who this person is? Although I've never seen her before, I can recognize her with a single glance. Do you want to die?" He saw Zhixio and nodded, saying nothing. In the end, he saw Guan Fei Bai, and his brows instantly rose like swords. Why have you also come? Chen Changsheng was worried that Chusu would launch a sneak attack on Guan Fei Bai, so he had him remain in the Taoist church yesterday. Now that Chusu had been expelled from Wenshui City and Guan Fei Bai knew that Tang 36 might be released, he had specially come to the old estate to wait. He hadn't expected that after so many years, this fellow would still be as annoying as ever. I can't come? Guan Fei Bai's brows also rose up like swords. Just when he believed that Tang 36 would continue to oppose him as before, Tang 36 smiled and said, "Those who come from afar are guests. I welcome you with all my might." He then changed the topic, his smile fading. He pulled Jishio to his side and said, "In the future, when we go to Mount Li, you also have to welcome us." Guan Fei Bai shook his head, thinking, I was still worrying about this fellow being locked up. Now that I think about it, my worries were truly unnecessary. The thick curtains fell, forming a single room. All gazes and the snow on the edge of the well were blocked outside. The tiles on the mahjong table were in a mess. Some were standing, some had fallen, some were facing the sky, and some were not for anyone to see. One could faintly see the remnants of yesterday's games. Chen Changsheng and the Tang Old Master sat across from each other, separated by the mahjong table. Tang 36 walked up to the table and looked at Chen Changsheng. "Have you made it clear?" Chen Changsheng nodded. Tang 36 grumpily said, "Then why haven't you quickly given up your seat? This is your clan's chair. Can I stop you from sitting on it?" Chen Changsheng helplessly stood up and sat on the chair next to him. Tang 36 sat on his original seat. It was precisely the seat across from the Tang Old Master. This seat naturally had its meaning. After entering the room, he had wanted to drive Chen Changsheng away and sit on this seat. There naturally had to be a deeper meaning. "Now it's our turn to talk." Tang 36 looked at the Tang Old Master and said. As he said this, the emotions in his eyes were very complex. There was the affection of a child, sorrow and sorrow, worry and reluctance, loathing and loneliness. When he finished speaking, these complex and indescribable emotions completely vanished, leaving behind only apathy. Chapter 858. The Tang Old Master replied, "What's there to talk about with a little child like you?" Tang 36 smiled. "Old scoundrel, do you think this mahjong game is over?" For some reason, Chen Changsheng felt a chill when he saw his smile, and then felt a little sad for him. The first thing he had said upon leaving the Tang clan's ancestral hall had been, "Where's that old bastard?" Comparing the terms old bastard and old scoundrel, the former naturally expressed greater resentment. He was currently using the latter, but that did not mean that his resentment was lessening. It could only mean that his attitude was growing colder and colder. Coldness was because he was emotionless. The Tang Old Master was too emotionless. On the surface, everything that had happened yesterday was naturally due to the Tang Old Master's wisdom and resolve. When he learned that his second son was colluding with the demons, he placed righteousness before family. But Tang 36 did not think this way. He had spent half a year in the ancestral hall without saying a word, and had long since thought through everything clearly. He had already seen through his grandfather. If Chen Changsheng had not come to Wenshui, his father would have assuredly died, and he would have been imprisoned until his death. Whether it was the poisoning or the struggle for power, many things seemed to have been done by the Tang second master. But whose Tang clan was the Tang clan? If the Tang Old Master had not maintained his silence, would these things have happened? And this wasn't even considering the fact that it had been the Tang Old Master's personal order to imprison Tang 36 in the ancestral hall. If there was a mastermind in this matter, the Tang Old Master was the true mastermind. But the Tang Old Master had not expected that, for the sake of his grandson, the orthodoxy would adopt such an unyielding stance, one that bordered on mutual destruction. The Chen Changsheng that had appeared in Wenshui City was not the mature and steady pope that placed the orthodoxy and the people of the world above all else. He was more like a brute whose hot-bloodedness had clouded his mind. The Tang Old Master had also not expected that South Stream Temple and the Mount Li Sword Sect would also display such a resolute stance, especially the fact that the latter had caused the Choshan clan to shrink back. And he had certainly not expected that these Yus would directly flip the mahjong tiles, allowing many people to see the truth of this mahjong game. The signs made of green bamboo kept rubbing against each other, producing a pleasant sound. Then they gradually became tidy. Tang 36 was very skilled at shuffling the cards. He didn't forget to chat with Chun Changsheng for a bit. Ever since I was young, I always wanted to play cards in this room, but this old guy always said I was still young and didn't give me the chance. Actually, if we talk about playing cards, he is no match for me. After learning that Su Yurong had once been mahjong partners with the Tang Old Master, Qin Changsheng had always wanted to know why Tang 36 had never seen her. Only when he heard these words did he realize that there was such a story. In the eyes of the Tang Old Master, Tang 36 was just a child, so he naturally had no right to enter the room. Do you really think you're qualified to play cards with me? The Tang Old Master did not move. His right hand stroked his cane as he calmly asked Tang 36. Tang 36 didn't have any intention of respecting the elder. He just stacked the tiles in front of him and ignored the rest of the scattered tiles on the table. He said, "The game of cards I played with second uncle yesterday was not bad, right?" The Tang Old Master replied, "That's because I gave you a good hand." Tang 36 replied, "That last hand was my own." Both of these statements were correct. Whether it was the Torture Hall, Minister Wei, Five-Kind Man, or those hidden forces in the old estate, they were all the Tang clan's best cards. When these cards fell into Tang 36's hands, the Tang Second Master did not have much power to resist, so the Tang Second Master very straightforwardly chose not to resist, instead placing all his hopes on his final thunderous strike. He had not expected that Tang 36 had prepared an especially beautiful hidden hand. The Tang Old Master expressionlessly said, "Without my cards, you would have lost everything long ago. How could you have the chance to last until the last game?" "Reasonable." Tang 36 raised his head and said, "Then today I will not use the clan's cards, but my own cards to fight with you." As he said this, he stared straight into the Old Master's eyes, or at the same level. In short, it was extremely rude and unyielding. The Tang Old Master mocked, "What good cards could a little cub like you have?" Tang 36 replied, "His cards are my cards. Who dares to say that those cards are bad?" He then turned to Qin Changsheng and asked, "There's no problem in borrowing them, right?" Qin Changsheng replied, "It's not like they're books. If you want to use them, you can take them. What are you pretending to be generous for?" Tang 36 mocked, "Back then, I wanted to take a look at your sword, but you refused. You were so nervous about something." He was referring to the old matter in the Plum Garden Inn. The two looked at each other and smiled, no longer arguing. The Tang Old Master did not smile, but for the first time, his expression turned grave. In this mahjong game between the Tang clan grandfather and grandson, there was only one spectator, Chun Changsheng. Although he did not participate, he was not a pure spectator because his cards were all on the table, all in front of Tang 36. This game was not played in the capital, nor was it the bloody battle to the end that was popular in Wenshui City, nor was it the river of blood that the disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect loved to play. The way Tang 36 played was very much in line with his own personality, and it was also easier for a beginner like Chun Changsheng to understand. In terms of size, clatter clatter could be heard in the quiet room. It was the sound of bamboo tiles colliding with a hard old pear wood table. Those tiles were thrown onto the table and quietly laid there, like dragon horses bathing in the sun on a meadow. Once the order was given, these soldiers would line up in formation and charge without rest. In the red were the red-dyed banners flapping in the wind. They were the Orthodoxy Cavalry, the Mount Song Army Headquarters, and the Tsong Province Army Headquarters. Two were the Iron Spear, the painted armor Xiao Zhang, who had been pursued by the imperial court for 3 years, but had instead killed many of its experts. There was also the Blade, the Dragon, the Tiger, and the millions of believers. Little Chicken was a peacock, but also a phoenix. Tang 36 flipped over the tiles in his hand. Chun Changsheng uneasily asked, "Neither of them will be happy with this description, right?" Tang 36 replied, in distress that something is not as good as that. It's just a description. There's no need to be so serious. Besides, why did you pick out a tile that looks like a phoenix for me? Chen Changsheng had only recognized all the tiles yesterday, so how could he possibly pick one? He could only say nothing. This was very funny, but the Tang old master still did not laugh. His expression was even more solemn than before. Tang 36 had already finished playing the tiles in his hand, but the Tang old master still had not moved. The countless mahjong tiles represented the factions of the opposing side. In terms of strength, it was hard to say who would win and who would lose in the end. If the Tang old master tried to reason with these two juniors, he would assuredly win. But the Tang clan would assuredly lose. Chapter 859. But besides the strength on the cards, there were also many strengths hidden under the table that would often display their most important effects at the most crucial moment. For example, in the coup of the Mausoleum of Books 3 years ago, if not for the Tang clan, Shang Xingzhou would have found it very difficult to control the situation in the capital. You are a descendant of the Tang clan, so you should be well aware of where the Tang clan is strongest. The Tang old master said to Tang 36. Is it those old words again? Tang 36 indifferently said. At the time, second uncle was constantly nagging in my ear, telling me to learn reverence, and the most revered aspect of our Tang clan is our history. To put it another way, it's because our Tang clan has lived the longest on the continent. The Tang old master said, it truly is some old words, but old words are often correct. I didn't say that these words were wrong. Time and history are naturally revered, even frightening. Tang 36 looked at the old master and said, the longer one lives, the more secrets one knows. The Tang clan has lived on this world for countless years, so it naturally knows countless secrets and has countless hidden hands. Is this also the so-called resources? The Tang old master replied, it's not that simple, but it can be understood this way. Tang 36 calmly said, if we use time as a yardstick, then whether it's the Qiushan clan, the Wu clan, the Mutuo clan, or even the Liang, Chun, Wang, and Zhu clans of the last 1,000 years, none of them can compare to the Tang clan. The cards I played are naturally also inferior, but you've forgotten one thing. What thing? I still have a friend. Tang 36 patted Chun Chongsheng on the shoulder and continued, history, time, resources. Everyone in the Tang clan talks about these words every day, and I'm truly tired of hearing them. Do they really think that they're invincible in the world? Have all of you forgotten that there's a place called the Dao sect? The Dao sect was the Dao sect, not some place. It was now the Orthodoxy. The Orthodoxy was not a noble clan, but it was older than all the noble clans, including the Tang clan. The Orthodoxy was not a sect, but it was the largest sect, including the longevity sect. Who could exist longer than the Orthodoxy, have a longer history, and have deeper resources? The Tang clan? Was it not a joke to say these things in front of the Orthodoxy? You locked me up in the ancestral hall for half a year, so I could think about some things. Tang 36 took out a scroll from his sleeve and placed it on the table. He said to the Tang old master, there are some problems that need to be clearly thought through, and they are now clear. There are also some problems that need to be prepared for the future. These are my preparations. You can take a look. The dossier was filled with small, densely packed words, and there were probably more than 10,000 of them. As the Tang old master read these words, his face turned colder and colder, his eyes narrowed. It was quiet in the room. Only the sound of flipping could be heard. Chen Changsheng glanced at Tang 36 and thought to himself, what did he write? Tang 36 ignored him and continued to stare at the old master. He subconsciously clenched his fists and his fingers turned white. Do you think the situation will develop as you imagine? The Tang old master finally finished reading the file. He slowly raised his head and expressionlessly asked Tang 36. Tang 36 said, I'm the only grandson of the Tang family. No one knows the Tang family better than me. If I were to lead the attack on the Tang family, it would be more or less like this. Chen Changsheng vaguely understood what was written on the file. The Tang old master fell quiet for a very long time, then said, I admit that you have a great understanding of the family business, and I also admit that your plans are truly sinister and ruthless. But since you are the only grandson of the Tang family, How can you be so callous and heartless to your own clan? Can you convince yourself of this? Tang 36 replied, I will tell myself that I am learning from you. Isn't the head of the Tang clan supposed to be so callous and heartless? The Tang Old Master asked, Then have you ever thought, if the Tang clan is destroyed, what will happen to the human race? I've always felt that the Tang clan's greatest problem is narcissism. Tang 36 continued, As a person, narcissism can, to a certain extent, increase one's charm, such as myself. But as a clan, being too narcissistic is not a good thing, because it is easy to misjudge one's own importance and make mistakes in negotiations with one's opponents. I hope that Elder will not make this mistake. The Tang clan is not like the uncles of the other branches imagine it to be. If it collapses, it will drag down the entire human world. All industries will cease to flourish. The people will become destitute, and the world will fall into chaos. The Tang Old Master stared into his eyes and asked, The problem is, how can you be sure that this situation will not occur? Tang 36 replied, So what if it does? With me here, as long as the imperial court and the orthodoxy do not lose their heads, this chaotic situation will last for 1.5 years at most. The Tang Old Master's eyes grew colder and colder. But in this 1.5 years, how many people will starve to death? Have you ever thought about it? Tang 36 calmly gazed at him for a very long time, then said, I might starve to death in the ancestral hall. Has Elder ever thought about this? At this point, the Tang Old Master finally felt threatened, because what Tang 36 was using to threaten him was the thing that he cared about the most, the Tang clan's everlasting legacy. Moreover, Tang 36 had succeeded in proving that he had the ability, or at least the possibility, of destroying the Tang clan, and that he really could do it. The Tang Old Master finally understood what sort of change the half-year in the ancestral hall had brought to his once undisciplined and cheerful grandson. If you really do this, your memorial tablet will not have the right to enter the ancestral hall, and your name will also be erased from the genealogy. On the first day that the Tang clan is ruined, I will burn down the ancestral hall. I've already lived there for half a year. Do you think that I still want to live there after I die? Then what about your eternal infamy? Even if you're buried in the Li Palace, when people pass by your grave, they will still spit on it. If I can crawl out of my grave, I will naturally spit it back. If I can't, what need is there to care? Is being the greatest prodigal son in history so interesting to you? Very interesting. You're not prepared to give this clan to me. So what does it matter if I ruin this clan? The common people would often use the phrase 1,000 gold is spent to come back again to describe heroism. But only by being a prodigal son to this extent could one be truly heroic. If you give the Tang clan to me, it will be mine, and I will guard it well. If you don't give the Tang clan to me, there will be a day when I will defeat it in my hands. Tang 36 looked at the Tang Old Master, his expression so serious that it had nothing to do with a joke. It was obvious that the word defeat in his words had two meanings. The Tang Old Master looked into his eyes and said, Perhaps I should have killed you a long time ago. Tang 36 replied, It's not too late now. The Tang Old Master was quiet for a very long time. Finally, he said, Reasonable. Chun Changsheng had been quiet for even longer than the Tang Old Master, not saying much from start to finish. Now, he finally spoke. He looked at the Tang Old Master and shook his head. No. Chapter 860. Chun Changsheng had no idea why Tang 36 had come to the old estate, or why he wanted to play this game of mahjong with the old master. It wasn't until Tang 36 stated his request that he finally understood. Chun Changsheng had brought the orthodoxy and braved the dangers of coming to Wenshui City. Only by putting on the most unyielding stance did the Tang Old Master change his mind. Tang 36 had been released from the ancestral hall, but the Tang's second master had been imprisoned in some place. A normal person would probably express their gratitude to Chun Changsheng and those fellows outside the room, and then think about how to repay them in the future. But Tang 36 was no normal person, and he did not walk the normal path. He was keenly aware that this sort of affection could only be repaid with the Tang clan. The old estate was very quiet. The snow on the edge of the well was melted by the sunlight, silently trickling down the walls of the well. The Tang old master expressionlessly said, "If the Orthodoxy ultimately loses this war, no matter how much you understand the Tang clan, without the cards in your hand, how can you threaten me? Since you've been thinking in the ancestral hall for half a year, it's impossible that you haven't thought of this. So just what do you want?" "I want second uncle to die. Immediately die before the sun sets." Tang 36 looked into the Tang old master's eyes and calmly said, "And then I want the Tang clan to maintain a neutral stance in this war." The Tang old master was quiet for a very long time. Then he asked, "If I say no, you will turn those words on the dossier into real means?" Tang 36 replied, "Correct." The Tang old master looked at the green bamboo tiles on the table and slightly creased his brow. "Your mahjong is truly a mess." Tang 36 replied, "Chun Changsheng and I are both young, and so are those people outside the room. Our mahjong skills are naturally inferior to yours. But we have the courage to flip the table at any time, because we can play another game, but you can't because you're already old." The Tang old master looked at Tang 36 and suddenly said, "Did you ever think that perhaps after yesterday, I was already prepared to make you clan head? Purely from the perspective of the clan's interests, after yesterday's incident, it now appeared that the best successor to the Tang clan was naturally Tang 36. If Shang Xingzhou and the imperial court won, the Tang old master still had enough time to change Tang 36's mind, or even change the candidate for clan head. If Chun Changsheng and the Orthodoxy won, the Tang old master only needed to hand the Tang clan over to Tang 36, and Shui City would be unaffected. Qin Changsheng didn't think about these things. These things were a bit complicated for him. He was not good at dealing with the complicated affairs of the world. He was only good at looking at people. Those days in the Orthodox Academy had made him keenly aware that Tang 36 did not want to be clan head. But Tang 36 must have thought of these questions, so why was his attitude so intense today? "Even if I become the head of the family, it will be many years in the future. I'm more concerned about the family's attitude in the next few years." Tang 36 said, "And a one-sided promise will never be as firm as an agreement made by two parties under threat." The Tang old master asked, "You don't believe me?" Tang 36 said, "So many things have happened. Don't you think the word believe is ridiculous? From the day you were born, you were the next head of the Tang family that I chose. Don't forget, it's you, not your father. How much have I done so that you could take over as the next patriarch? How much did the Tang family pay? What about you? You actually foolishly insisted on standing on his side because of your so-called affection." The Tang old master grew angrier and angrier as he spoke, his voice growing louder and louder. In his final words, he pointed directly at Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng silently moved to the side, avoiding that finger. "Is it a foolish sentiment? If not for this affection, I would still be pretending to be mute in the ancestral hall." Tang 36 was finally enraged, yelling, "If Chun Changsheng had not been my friend, I would have died 3 years ago." The Tang old master angrily said, "Do you really think that I would kill you?" Tang 36 sneered, "Of course you would kill me. In any case, you just need to wash your hands and eat a few tables of vegetarian food, and you'll feel that you're innocent." This was the second time the term vegetarian food had been used in the Tang clan's old estate. Yesterday, news had come from the ancestral hall that Tang 36 had sent someone to Chicken Crow Nunnery to prepare a vegetarian meal. But before the vegetarian meal could be prepared, everything had come to an end. Just like yesterday, upon hearing the term vegetarian meal, the Tang old master's complexion turned abnormally nasty, his hands trembling. After some time, the Tang old master finally calmed down and asked, "How was the taste?" That table of vegetarian food was sent into the ancestral hall at night. "It's already cold." Tang 36 fell quiet for a while, then said, "The taste was ordinary, and it wasn't real meat. It was inferior to the Clear Lake restaurant of the past. It was also inferior to the Orthodox Academy's dining hall." The Tang old master was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "Is that so? After I die, I don't know if anyone will be willing to eat it. Grandfather, this is the greatest difference between us. At this point in this long conversation, Tang 36 had finally said this word for the first time. But this word did not warm the mood in the room. On the contrary, it made it even colder, just like what he said next. Yes, in order to raise me to be the head of the Tang clan, you truly did treat me extremely well in these 20-some years. The clan truly did pay a great price. But did you ever think? Those were not what I wanted, nor were they what everyone in the clan was willing to accept, like the matter of all the branches having no descendants. Tang 36 angrily said, "Yes, my Tang clan has its own talent in cultivation and longevity. After Sir passes away 1,000 years, I will be in complete control of the clan, and the other branches can have as many children as they want. Those younger brothers and sisters are much younger than me, so they can no longer threaten me. But did Sir ever think that this was too ruthless?" That year, Fourth Aunt secretly got pregnant with a child. Using the excuse that her mother was gravely ill, she returned to her paternal home and hid the child for 5 months. But in the end, you still found out. You wanted Fourth Uncle to force Fourth Aunt to abort that child. Did you ever think about how much pain Fourth Aunt was in? Compared to that, what do those hostile gazes the chief branch receive count for? As for the vegetarian meal on Chicken Crowing Mountain, you don't need to worry because I am not you. Tang 36 gave the old master a disappointed glance, then got up and walked out of the room. Chen Changsheng also left. Only the Tang old master was left in the room. He sat alone at the table, his thoughts a mystery. Those emerald green bamboo tablets just lay quietly on the table, untouched. The dark clouds gathered once more, and the surface of the river at night was very quiet, very gloomy. In the past, the surface of the river would have been illuminated by many lanterns. Tang 36 sat by the river, gazing at the pitch-black shore as he thought of those days. Qin Changsheng was also present. Today, he had once more come to the estate of the chief branch of the Tang clan as a guest, but not as the Pope, but as a friend. Not long ago, news had come from the old estate that the Tang old master had agreed to Tang 36's request. Perhaps it was because of that mahjong game, or perhaps it was because of the young man's determination to flip the mahjong table, or perhaps it was because of the vegetarian meal from Chicken Crowing Mountain. Tang 36 suddenly asked, "Do you want to know this story?" Chun Changsheng replied, "If you want to tell it. I was too busy in the afternoon and forgot to update. Today, I'll just update this chapter. I'll be leaving for Hubei tomorrow, and there are many matters to take care of at home, so the updates will slow down. Continuing to update twice for a month has made my mental state much better, and everyone finds it rather interesting. This is truly excellent. Thank you, everyone. The updates will only be delayed for a few days. Once the journey is over and I return to my home in Yichang, I will definitely continue to work hard." Chapter 861. I have an aunt who is being raised in that nunnery. Grandpa wanted to leave a way out for the Tang family, or maybe he wanted to ensure her safety, so he didn't dare to let anyone know. But when I was young, he liked to hold me on his lap and tell me a lot of stories, and this story is one of them. He thought I was young at that time, but he didn't know that I remembered everything. Tang 36 looked at the manor on the other side of the river and said in a daze. Chen Changsheng glanced at him and asked, "How old were you then?" Tang 36 replied, "About a year old." Chen Changsheng said, "You can actually remember things from when you were so young?" Tang 36 said, "Maybe I'm smarter than others." Chen Changsheng said emotionally, "Isn't this a bit too early?" "Who am I? I'm a genius." This was something worth laughing at, but neither Chen Changsheng nor Tang 36 laughed. After a moment of silence, Tang 36 continued, "I don't know who the old master had that daughter with, but he probably only loved that woman his entire life, so the person he truly loved was that daughter. It was precisely because I truly loved her that I knew that old master wouldn't let her become the head of the family. I wasn't afraid of her, so I brought this matter up. Yes, I just want to use the woman from Chicken Crow Nunnery to threaten Grandpa." Qin Changsheng didn't know what to say. Tang 36 glanced at him and asked, "Do you think I'm very cold-blooded and heartless now? Daoist Baishur is dead. I ordered it." Qin Changsheng suddenly said something that seemed unrelated. His gaze fell upon the dark surface of the river. "Yesterday, The Tang clans of Five Kind Man and Chusu had engaged in a great battle here. Poisonous blood had splattered everywhere, and the banks of the river were filled with foul poison chi. The Tang family had already started to clean up, but many fish had died. He and Tang 36 had good eyesight. No matter how dark the environment was, they could still see the dead fish on the rotten mud. In the Orthodox Academy, Tang 36 had told him not to sink into the mud, so what about now? Chun Changsheng said, "Does this count as us becoming the kind of people we hated the most in the past?" Tang 36 said, "If that can change something, it's also good." Chun Changsheng asked, "For example?" Tang 36 pointed to the opposite bank and said, "If you hadn't done that, the darkness on the other side of the river would have fallen behind us." On both sides of the river were the manors of the Tang family's first and second branch. There were no lights on the other side of the river. It was dark and gloomy. It was unknown how many people from the second branch had died since yesterday. Just like what Tang 36 said, if they lost, it would be the eldest branch's turn to suffer. Tang 36 said, "Thank you." Chun Changsheng replied, "You're welcome." According to Tang 36's request, before the sun set, the Tang's second master was dead. The next morning, he personally went to the autopsy and confirmed that there were no problems. The Orthodoxy had dispatched Ling Hai Zhuang. According to his report to Chun Changsheng upon his return, Tang 36 had fallen silent for a very long time, his thoughts inscrutable. After taking Chun Changsheng's medicine, eldest Fang's condition stabilized a lot, but he still hadn't woken up from his coma. The sinister poison had already seeped deep into his internal organs. It would be very troublesome to completely remove it. He had to start with the longevity sect. The Tang clan had already dispatched people to the longevity sect, and it was said that the blind zither player might also be secretly accompanying them. Tang 36 was still worried and decided to personally go. Chun Changsheng also wanted to go to the south. There were several important matters he needed to take care of. 3 years had passed since the confluence of the North and South had come to an agreement, and there was also a possibility that the North and South of the Orthodoxy could be reunited. In the southern faction of the Orthodoxy, the longevity sect had already withered and no longer had much strength. It could only secretly make a few small moves, and the Li Palace needed to convince Holy Maiden Peak. Based on the relationship between Chun Changsheng and Su Yorong, there really was a chance that this matter would succeed, and the Orthodoxy really might return to its former glory. To the Orthodoxy, this was naturally a good thing, but to the imperial court, this was not necessarily the case. Everyone left Wenshui City, and it was time to part. The first to leave was Guan Fei Bai. Logically speaking, Mount Li and the longevity sect were both in the south, so he was completely capable of traveling with Chun Changsheng and the others. However, he had received news that his eldest brother would soon return to the mountain, so he couldn't help but feel somewhat anxious. 2 days ago, when Chun Changsheng had gone to the old estate, he had remained in the Taoist church because of his injuries, so he didn't know that a certain person had appeared outside the old estate. Chun Changsheng already had a vague idea of what was going on. He said to Guan Fei Bai, "I saw your senior brother. Help me say hello." Guan Fei Bai believed that he was speaking of Gohanshi, so he didn't think too much about it and naturally agreed. He then turned to Zhixio and said, "If your illness can be cured, you can come to Mount Li at any time. No one will stop you, but if your illness cannot be cured and you are destined to die a violent death, then do not harm Junior Sister. We will not let you meet." Zhixio's expression did not change, as if he had not heard these words. Chun Changsheng took a sword and placed it in front of Guan Fei Bai. "Your sword is broken. I picked one for you, but I don't know if it's suitable or not." That night in the rear garden of the Taoist church, Guan Fei Bai's sword, which was only worth a few qian of silver, had been broken by Chusu. Chun Changsheng had always wanted to get a sword for him. The reason he had not given it to him 2 days ago, besides Guan Fei Bai's injuries, was also because he did not want the Mount Li sword sect to be dragged into the mess of the Tang clan because of his affairs. Everyone knew that Chun Changsheng had many swords at his side, and they were all very good swords. Guan Fei Bai gazed at this sword that exuded an ancient aura and yet did not lose its sharpness, his eyes slightly brightening. This sword also came from the Garden of Zhou, from the sword pool. It was called Army Breaker, derived from the meaning of strength that could break 10,000 armies. It was extremely suitable for his personality. Unexpectedly, Guan Fei Bai did not immediately accept it. After a moment of silence, he said, "I didn't do anything in this matter, and we already owe you too many favors. We can't owe you any more." He was talking about how his martial uncle from the Mount Li sword sect had been saved by the Cinnabar pill, and also about how Chun Changsheng had escorted Su Li 10,000 li back south several years ago. Because of eldest brother, that engagement. Because of the matter between junior sister and Zhixiu, the disciples of the Mount Li sword sect were very unwilling to owe Chun Changsheng favors. Otherwise, they would truly feel embarrassed to fall out with Chun Changsheng in the future. If you really feel that you owe me anything, you've already paid it off after yesterday. Chun Changsheng was speaking of the scene outside the old estate yesterday. If Luo Bu had not taken the yellow paper umbrella and said something to the Tang Old Master, the Tang Old Master would never have handed over Wenshui City for 2 hours, and naturally, none of the events that followed would have occurred. Guan Fei Bai didn't understand what he was talking about and was unwilling to take the sword. Tang 36 said, "What's a sword worth? I took several hundred of his swords and still didn't feel anything." Guan Fei Bai replied, "That's because there are very few people in the world who are as shameless as you." Tang 36 said, "This is called being free and at ease. Take the sword. In the future, if we really do fall out, just don't use this sword." Guan Fei Bai thought it over, then said, "That's reasonable. If that day really does come, remember to remind me." Chapter 862. The second group to leave was the largest. In the end, the Tang Old Master agreed to stay out of the war between the imperial court and the orthodoxy. This was already the greatest benefit the Li Palace could obtain. Linghai Zhuang and Archbishop Enlin led the several thousand orthodoxy cavalry outside the city back to the capital to deal with the new situation. Linghai Zhuang asked, "When will His Holiness return?" Chun Changsheng replied, "On the day he should return, he will return." Linghai Zhuang and Archbishop Enlin left. Countless plumes of dust rose from the plains to the north of the city, gradually shrouding the old city. As he gazed at the distant scene, Tang 36 suddenly said, "Don't believe that the old master will always remain neutral." That day, Chusu was intentionally let go. Chun Changsheng already knew the specifics of the battle by the Wenshui River, so he nodded his head to indicate that he understood. The Tang clan's five-kind man was very frightening, and it had happened in Wenshui City. No matter how formidable Chusu was, there was no reason for him to escape. Since that blind zither player is the only remaining elder of the longevity sect, it makes sense for him to be lenient. The speaker was the bishop of Wenshui City. As the number one figure the orthodoxy had placed in Wenshui City, he had played an extremely important role in this incident, had played many roles. The Tang clan would probably not vent their anger on him, but if he continued to remain in Wenshui City's Taoist church, the Tang clan would probably find him somewhat of an eyesore. Chun Changsheng and Linghai Zhuang had already agreed that the Li Palace would soon dispatch a new bishop to Wenshui to take up his post. What to do with the original bishop had become a problem. Logically speaking, the bishop of Wenshui had performed such a great service for the orthodoxy that he should have returned to the capital and obtained an even nobler position, but he had personally killed Taoist Baisher. Upon returning to the capital, he would assuredly be viewed as a thorn by some people in the orthodoxy and encounter many problems. Thus, Chun Changsheng had still not made up his mind. "Now that we're leaving, have you thought it over?" Chun Changsheng asked the bishop. The bishop of Wenshui replied, "This lowly one wishes to serve at His Holiness's side." Tang 36 replied, "This position truly is better than any position in the Li Palace." To the people of the orthodoxy, what was the best position? Of course, it was the position closest to the Pope. Whether the Pope was in the south, the north, or the desolate west, as long as one could remain at his side for a long time, one would assuredly obtain the greatest benefits. The Archbishop of Wenshui had a humble expression and gave a faint smile. He did not refute Tang 36's words, saying, "Your Holiness speaks reason." Tang 36 looked at him and asked, "If this position is a shortcut to other positions, then what position do you want in the end?" The Archbishop of Wenshui very seriously said, "In this life, there is no hope for the divine. I just want to be an archbishop before I return to the Sea of Stars." Tang 36 was very interested and asked, "Which holy hall?" "Grass Moon Club." The Archbishop of Wenshui answered very quickly. It was obvious that he had thought about this for a very long time. Hearing this answer, Tang 36 couldn't help but laugh. The Grass Moon Hall was one of the Li Palace's 6 halls, the residence of the Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements. After the previous Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements, Mu Jiushi, had been exiled from the Orthodoxy by the Pope, the Grass Moon Hall had remained masterless. The Archbishop of Wenshui's goal was very accurate and reasonable. "I admire you very much," Tang 36 said. "May I know your name?" This person was the highest representative of the Orthodoxy in Wenshui City, and he had lived in Wenshui City for many years, but Tang 36 truly did not know his name. The Archbishop of Wenshui smiled and said, "The old master used to like to call me Little Hu, but sir can also call me this." The Tang old master could call him this, but Tang 36 did not have the right. Somewhat unsure, he asked, "Little Hu, who?" "The Hu of peasant household. He's called Hu 32. Tang 36's eyes lit up at this name, and he seemed to appreciate it. "A good name. Is it a ranking in the family or the number of houses?" "When I was young, the place I lived in suffered an earthquake. In the end, only 32 households were left in the entire village. My entire family died, and I was the only one left. I was raised by these 32 households." The Archbishop calmly continued, "I gave myself this name to remind myself that living is very difficult, so I cannot die early." The party left Wenshui City and headed southeast. Immediately, a mountain appeared before them. Even though it was the middle of winter and it had been snowing for the past 2 days, the mountain was still green. The mountain was not very tall, and tinsome peach blossoms could be seen amidst the shade of the green trees. There was probably a hot spring on the mountain, or perhaps an array like the one in the Taoist church of Wenshui. As he gazed at the peach blossoms and green trees, Chen Changsheng thought about his year in the mountains. Other than being somewhat lonely, it had been very peaceful and joyful, and he somewhat missed the little black dragon. He wondered if her journey to the west was proceeding smoothly. Amidst the green branches and peach blossoms, he could faintly make out the eaves of the Taoist temple. Tang 36 silently gazed at that place. Chen Changxing asked, "This is Chicken Crowing Mountain?" Tang 36 said nothing, only nodded. This meant that his aunt was probably in that Taoist temple. "Have you seen it before?" Chen Changxing asked. Tang 36 shook his head, but after a moment he nodded. "I was immature when I was young, and I always remembered this matter. I secretly went up the mountain to take a look, and then I met." "What happened after they met? Did the other party recognize him? Did they talk? Was it just this one meeting, or were there many other seemingly unintentional, but actually intentional meetings?" He stopped here. For the safety of the woman in the Taoist temple, or perhaps a peaceful life, it was best not to meet or mention her. They probably wouldn't meet again in the future, right? Traveling southeast for 30-some li, the Wenshui flowed into the River of Hatred, no longer having its own name. As one of the most famous rivers on the continent, the River of Hatred originated from the depths of the Cloud Grave, flowed through the fertile plains of the south, and then passed through the Luo May mountain range, receiving even more tributaries. Its grandeur was already extremely great, but if one followed the river upstream and arrived at the canyon, one would see the truly magnificent scenery. Chen Changsheng and the others walked through the canyon. The mountains on both sides of the canyon reached into the clouds, and the forests were extremely dense. Few people could be seen, and only the cries of monkeys could be heard. They didn't need to worry about being followed, and they didn't need to worry about safety. This wasn't the northern frontier, so they couldn't meet demon experts. It was also very difficult to gather a large army, unlike Wenshui City, which had countless experts. The further upstream they went, the steeper the canyon became, and the faster the river flowed, but the water did not slow down. It was truly astonishing, and thunderous booms could be heard without end. As they continued on their journey, they could gradually see signs of human habitation in the canyon, but it would often take them half a day to see a few households. The vast majority of the time, all they could see was the wilderness. Before Hu 32 became Bishop of Wenshui, he had preached in this canyon for many years, so he had an extremely good understanding of the customs of this region. As he explained, Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 listened to his explanations and looked at the scenery on both sides of the canyon, so they naturally didn't find it boring. Nank followed the group with a confused expression, tugging on the corner of Chun Changsheng's clothes. It was hard to say if she could understand what was being said. Zhixio's gaze was always vigilantly watching the forest for any sign of activity. He had no interest in listening to these idle chatter. As long as there were people, there would definitely be believers of the orthodoxy, and there would be news. At a crossing, they received the latest news. It was said that 2 days ago, someone outside Fengyang City saw a drenched monster kill 2 shepherd boys and then eat them. I still want to do my best to maintain 2 chapters, afraid that the string will loosen, but I can't be sure for the next few days. Just as I said before, the first chapter is around 4 o'clock. For the second chapter, let's wait until 9 o'clock. If there's nothing, then there's nothing. Tomorrow, we'll begin our long journey again. Thinking back to 1 year ago, when I drove with my leader from Heilongjiang back to Hubei, it seems like a lifetime has passed. Really, this year was the slowest, fastest, most arduous, and most fulfilling year of my life. Chapter 863. Upon hearing this news, Chen Changsheng fell silent for a very long time. Several days later, the party arrived at Fengyang City. Fengyang City was a county city under the jurisdiction of the Feng City government. Compared to other counties, it was much smaller, but it was already one of the most bustling places in the valley. Standing on the cliff and gazing at the lights of the distant county city, the party decided to rest for the night and enter the city in the morning. Thinking that Nank's identity was rather sensitive, Chen Changsheng sent her into the Garden of Zhou. She had already completely forgotten what had happened in the Garden of Zhou, but she was very fond of the environment and did not show any resistance. Back then, Tang 36 had been viewing the monoliths in the mausoleum of books and had never entered the Garden of Zhou, so he was rather curious and asked Chen Changsheng to send him in a play. But not long after he entered, he came out. He found the Garden of Zhou very boring, and Nank found the Garden of Zhou very good for the same reason. There were no people in the Garden of Zhou, only countless monsters. Nank instinctively felt relaxed, but this only made Tang 36 feel bored. To Chen Changsheng's surprise, Zhixio also wanted him to send him into the Garden of Zhou. He quietly sat on the plains for a while. After coming out, he said to Chen Changsheng that the plains were now boring because the sun would set. The seal over the plains had already been broken, and the monsters living in the Garden of Zhou were constantly rising in level. Chen Changsheng knew that Zhixio did not find it boring for these reasons, nor was it really because the sun would set. It was because the girl who used to watch the sun with him was no longer there. At 5 in the morning, Chen Changsheng calmed his mind and opened his eyes to look at the river below the cliff. He felt rather regretful. For an entire night, he had spread his spiritual sense across the 2 shores of the valley, hoping to find any trace of Chusu, but he had found nothing. The climate in the valley was much warmer than the plains beyond the mountains, and Fengyang City was also much hotter than Wenshui City. Even in the depths of winter, there is still no snow. Even wearing a cotton-padded jacket would make one feel rather hot. It was just like those extremely thick chains on the river. In the sunlight, they did not give off the cold feeling of iron, but rather a burning sensation. Fengyang City was built against the mountains, and as one walked along the cliffs toward the city, one would see nothing but tea trees. Moreover, it was obvious that these tea trees had just been picked. Seeing the confused expressions of Chen Changsheng and the others, Hu 32 explained, "This place abounds in wild tea, and the winter batch has the best flavor. In the last 10-some years, Fenyang's wild tea has only gotten more and more famous, and the winter wild tea has also become a valuable commodity. Every year, a tea party will be held at this time, with the prefectural magistrate and archbishop personally attending. Countless tea merchants will gather here. It was still early in the morning, but Fenyang City was already bustling with activity. On both sides of the main road, leading from the river to the Seven Treasures stronghold above the city, several dozen tea shops had already opened their doors. Shouts and greetings rang out incessantly, and one could even smell the simple fragrance of tea wafting along the stone steps in the morning breeze. Under Hu 32's lead, Chun Changsheng and the others first strolled around the Seven Treasure stronghold, and then they went to the riverbank to take a look at the famous White Dragon Stone. As the sun gradually grew brighter, they found a relatively quiet tea house near the ferry to sit down and rest while they waited for the latest news to be reported back. The Seven Treasures stronghold was like a miniature city. It was built against the mountains and had a total of 7 floors, which wasn't all that remarkable. Moreover, because of the preparations for the tea party, the top 3 floors had been sealed off. This year, it just happened to be the winter flood season, so a large half of the White Dragon Stone had been submerged in the river. Tang 36 was rather unhappy, but only after he drank some tea did his mood somewhat recover. I didn't think that this tea would be so good. He raised the teacup in his hand and glanced at it in surprise. The wild tea in the cup was steaming, and the tea was rich but not greasy, as if it contained some sort of wild interest. When it comes to tasting tea, the first person that people think of is Liang Wang's son, but painted armor Xiao Zhang looks down on Liang Wang's son the most, believing that he has been burdened by a false reputation and has long since lost his true interest. Back then, a busybody once asked Liang Wang's son about this matter, and Liang Wang's son smiled and replied, "I don't submit to him in fighting, but I have no choice but to submit to him in discussing tea." Hu 32 continued. Only then did the world realize that Xiao Zhang was also a tea lover, and he had never liked those famous teas. He only liked to search for wild teas in the mountains and forests, poor villages, and small temples. The reason why Fenyang City's wild teas are famous is all because of Xiao Zhang's publicity in the last few years. When drinking tea, if there were no snacks, there would definitely be interesting topics to talk about. Only in this way could one talk about tea. Hu 32 was the most knowledgeable and tactful person in the orthodoxy, so he naturally would not let go of such a good topic. Tang 36 was a descendant of a noble clan, so he was naturally interested in this topic. Alas, Chen Changsheng and Zhixiu had never had anything to do with elegance. When he heard these words, he was not thinking about how Fenyang City's tea was or the gossip between Liang Wang's son and Xiao Zhang, but about some very boring matters. I wonder who is stronger, Liang Wang's son or Xiao Zhang? Chen Changxing asked. Everyone knew that this was the age of blooming wildflowers in the cultivation world, and this age had been opened by people like Wang Pe, Xiao Zhang, Liang Wang's son, Sun Mei, and the Tang second master. Of the outstanding figures of this generation, Wang Pe was unquestionably the strongest, but painted armor Xiao Zhang and Liang Wang's son were also extraordinary figures. In Xuanyang City, Chun Changsheng had met Xiao Zhang and Liang Wang's son once, and on the day that he killed Zhou Tong, he had met Xiao Zhang again. On that snowy day, he had killed his way in and out of the office of the department for purging officials. Wang Pe had severed his arm on the snowy river, broken through the divine domain, and cut down Tai Shu with his blade. In the end, he had been saved by Xiao Zhang. No one could understand why Xiao Zhang had done this. If Liang Wangsuan's goal in his life was extremely clear, known to the entire continent, then just what was Xiao Zhang's goal? Xiao Zhang is stronger than Liang Wang's son. The person who answered this question was Zhixiu. His words were naturally not based on the rankings on the Proclamation of Liberation. His life's goal is to become the strongest. His goal is even clearer, his methods even simpler. So, comparatively speaking, he's even more terrifying. What was the martial path that Xiao Zhang pursued? It was not Zhou Dufu's path of killing, nor was it Wang Po's straightforward path. His path was to fight. Whether he could win or not, he still had to fight, and the more he couldn't win, the more intense his desire to fight became. As a result, many people believed him to be a madman. Over the past several decades, he had fought countless times with Wang Pe, but he had never won once, but he had never admitted defeat. Now that Wang Pe was an expert of the divine domain, the gap in strength between the two was many times greater than it had been in the past, but Xiao Zhang still would not give up. From this aspect, Wang Pe's words on the snowy street were not wrong. The Tang's second master was far inferior to Xiao Zhang, Sun Mei, and the others, who 32 suddenly said, Xiao Zhang has been rather miserable these past few years. Chapter 864. For an expert like Xiao Zhang to be described as wretched meant that he truly was wretched. Tang 36 asked, because he saved Wang Pe that year? Hu 32 replied, correct. Back in the capital, he ruined the venerable Taoist plans, enraging all levels of society. The imperial court can't easily touch Wang Pe, but how could it let him go? In order to establish its might or to redeem the face it lost, the imperial court has been pursuing him for the last few years. He's been chased around like a stray dog, truly wretched. For an expert of the proclamation of liberation, like painted armor Xiao Zhang, to be pursued by a single wanted order from the imperial court sounded rather inconceivable. But it could not be forgotten that the imperial court had countless experts. They could switch shifts and rest, but Xiao Zhang was alone, with no family or friends. No matter where he went, he had to be wary of ambushes. Perhaps when he went out to eat a bowl of noodles, he would run into the most sinister assassins of the department for purging officials or the most experienced bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice. Moreover, these days were not just for a day, but all the time. Tang 36 glanced at Chen Chongsheng. Chen Chongsheng knew what he meant and shook his head. I had the Li Palace send someone to deliver a message, but he wasn't even willing to see me. Tang 36 asked, what about Wang Pe? He should be doing something. Chen Chongsheng replied, 2 years ago, the last news I received was that Xiao Zhang had sent word ahead of time that if Wang Pe tried to help him, he would commit suicide on the spot. Tang 36 thought to himself that this was truly in line with Xiao Zhang's personality. Shaking his head, he said, he truly can't afford to lose this face. Hu 36 explained, Fengyang City's winter wild tea became famous because of Xiao Zhang. So every year, Fengyang City would leave a portion of its best tea leaves for him. If the imperial court hadn't been pursuing him so closely, we might have been able to see Xiao Zhang appear in the next 2 days. The banks of the river were lined with tea trees that had been plucked and dried, forming many mountains of tea in the city. The best of these were the winter wild tea leaves, and they were arranged according to their grade along the stone steps of Seven Treasure Stronghold. The higher one went, the fewer the tea leaves, but they were naturally the most valuable. According to convention, the 2 baskets of the best tea leaves were placed at the very top. Hu 36 pointed and continued to explain, those 2 baskets of tea leaves are even more expensive than gold, and there's simply no market for them. Chen Chongsheng asked, where did the 2 baskets of tea go? Hu 32 replied, they're all tributes. 1 basket will enter the palace. Chen Chongsheng asked, what about the other basket? Tang 36 glanced at him like he was an idiot. Hu 32 also had a rather strange expression as he said, it's naturally for Sir. Chen Chongsheng finally understood, since it was a precious tribute of tea leaves, 1 basket would be sent to the imperial palace, the other basket would naturally be sent to the Li Palace. No matter what the relationship between the imperial court and the orthodoxy was, in a small place like Fengyang City, both sides had to treat each other with the utmost respect. The tea leaves you used to leave for Xiao Zhang were also like this? Tang 36 asked. Hu 32 shook his head and pointed at the treasure pavilion at the highest point of Seven Treasure Stronghold. The wild tea for Xiao Zhang was specially made and placed in there. Tang 36 said, given Xiao Zhang's personality, even if he knew that the imperial court might choose this place to surround and kill him, he might still come. Hu 32 said, he hasn't come for 2 years. Tang 36 asked, who did that box of tea go to? Hu 32 replied, on the surface, it would naturally be said that it wasn't sent out, but many people know that it was sent to the Prince of Xiang's estate in the capital. Tang 36 asked in surprise, "Why is that? What right does the Prince of Xiang have to bypass the imperial court and the orthodoxy?" Hu 32 smiled. "The magistrate of Feng City is His Highness's disciple." As they were chatting over tea, a shadow suddenly tore a wisp out of the thin clouds in the sky. A red goose flew through the clouds and landed in the distant government office. Soon after, gongs and drums began to beat, a notice was posted, and the government office was even filled with praises. In these 3 years, Chun Chong Sheng had been in the snowy mountains of the northern border, while Tang 36 had been imprisoned in the old estate and the ancestral hall. He had no idea what was going on. The Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets has changed the rankings. Hu 32 had a rather complicated expression. Chun Chong Sheng and Tang 36 finally understood what had happened. In the past, the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets would change the rankings around the Grand Examination or around the time of viewing the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books. Now that the Grand Examination had been halted for 3 years and the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets only existed in name, the rankings were still being updated. However, it no longer had much to do with the orthodoxy and was essentially the work of the imperial court. This did not affect the credibility of the rankings. After all, to the common people, the prestige of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets still existed, and the addition of the Emperor's imperial seal would only make the common people even more convinced. The conversation in the tea house came to a halt. The crowd quietly drank their tea, listening to the occasional noise on the street. The first to be announced was the proclamation of Azure Sky. As the names of Go Hanshi and Chun Chong Sheng left, more and more young geniuses of cultivation reached ethereal opening appeared. Less and less people paid attention to this proclamation that once represented the potential of these youths. However, Chun Chongsheng noticed that there were a few names on the proclamation of Azure Sky that he knew. Fu Xinji, Chun Fugui, Chu Wenbin. These are the first batch of students the Orthodox Academy had accepted. It seemed that Su Mou's management of the Orthodox Academy wasn't bad. It was different from when the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had been in charge. Now, when the imperial court changed the proclamations, the proclamation of Golden Distinction and the proclamation of Liberation would also be made public. The next to be announced was the proclamation of Golden Distinction. This time, he heard even more familiar names: Gohan Shi, Guan Fei Bai, Liang Ban Hu Zhonghui. Because of his and Su Yu Rong's identities, they naturally would not be listed in any of the proclamations. However, this year's proclamation of Golden Distinction was still the youngest in the past several hundred years. Apart from the era of Zhou Du Fu and Chun Xianba, there was no other era in which so many youths had entered star condensation. It truly was an era of blooming wildflowers. Next was the proclamation of Liberation. After Wang Pa had broken through 3 years ago, he had finally left the first rank that he had guarded for several decades. Xiao Zhang, who had once had the greatest hope of catching up to him, was not qualified to enter the rankings because he was wanted by the imperial court. As a result, the current first rank was naturally Liang Wang's son. Below him were Xiao De and other true experts whose names had long since spread far and wide. When Chun Chong Sheng heard the 4 words famous name Guan Bai from the 9th rank, he couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. When the proclamation of Liberation finished reading, and he still did not hear Qiu Shan Jun's name, he turned to the upper reaches of the valley and shook his head, his thoughts a mystery. Suddenly, fireworks began to rise from the distant government office. Diluted by the gradually flourishing light of the morning sun, they were not particularly gorgeous. Presumably, they had been decided on the spot for some unknown reason. Why did the government office have praises and fireworks? And most importantly, why did the imperial court suddenly change the proclamations? Very quickly, Chun Chongsheng's party in the tea house and the people by the river understood the reason. The Prince of Xiang had actually entered the divine domain. Chapter 865. The magistrate of Feng City had already come to Fengyang City for the tea party tomorrow, and the county office was probably buzzing with congratulatory voices. Hearing this news, everyone in the tea house looked at each other speechlessly, and a chill rose in their hearts. No one had expected that the Prince of Xiang's seclusion would actually succeed in entering the divine domain. This meant that from the moment he crossed that threshold, as long as he did not rebel or go against the Tao Master, then his position in the Great Zhou dynasty would never be shaken. In both the imperial court and the military, the Prince of Xiang was extremely powerful. Now that he had entered the divine domain, he had unquestionably become a truly powerful minister. Qin Changsheng thought back to how Su Rong had previously not given the Prince of Xiang a high evaluation, saying that although this prince had outstanding talent, he was licentious and tyrannical and had no hope of becoming divine. Now, it seemed that all of this was naturally false. For the Prince of Xiang to be able to maintain this false appearance for so many years, he was assuredly scheming something grand, which also meant that he was very ambitious. As the most powerful prince of the Great Zhou dynasty, if he had any ambitions, then it was very clear what he wanted. Qin Changsheng was a little worried about his senior, who was far away in the palace. At this moment, the sound of the imperial edict being read rang out on the street again. The Prince of Xiang's entry into the divine domain was not even the entirety of the changes to the proclamation. 3 months ago, the Mount Li sword sect master used his heart to cleanse his sword and successfully entered the divine domain. Hearing this news, the somewhat oppressive and silent atmosphere in the tea house was immediately dispelled, like a gentle breeze on a river. Tang 36 said to Qin Changsheng, "Congratulations. In the past, the Orthodox Academy and the Mount Li sword sect had many grudges and entanglements, even enmity that was very difficult to resolve, but that was all in the past. Now, the entire continent knew that between the imperial court and the orthodoxy, the Mount Li sword sect would naturally support the latter. They were allies with Qin Changsheng. The Mount Li sword sect master entering the divine domain was naturally a good thing for Qin Changsheng and the orthodoxy. Although an expert of the divine domain could not alter the disparity in strength between the two sides, it could at least lessen the shock brought about by the Prince of Xiang. Qin Changsheng thought to himself, so it turns out that such a major event has occurred in Mount Li. No wonder Luo Bu and Guan Feibai were in such a hurry to return. Everyone was very happy, except for Zhixiu, who had no expression on his face. Tang 36 understood why and comforted, "Don't think too much." In any case, even if the Mount Li sword sect master hadn't entered the divine domain, you still wouldn't have been able to defeat him. The red goose had finished its task of sending messages. It must have replenished its food and water in the government office. After resting for a while, it took off again and flew along the mountain path of the county toward the riverside. Presumably, when it reached an open area, it would flap its wings and fly away, breaking through the clouds and bringing the will of the imperial court to the people further away or in more remote areas. The people of the county looked at the red shadow that was as fast as lightning and excitedly applauded and cheered. Countless gazes followed it, and Qin Changsheng and the others in the tea house were no exception. Their gazes followed the red goose to the river and watched as it flapped its wings and quickly flew past the iron chains and into the sky. Suddenly, countless crossbow bolts shot out from the forest on the other side of the gorge. The red goose was not prepared at all and was shot by the crossbow bolt. It fell from the sky into the river and quickly disappeared. Everyone who saw this scene was stunned. Qin Changsheng's expression became somewhat solemn. He could clearly see that the crossbow bolts were not shot at the red goose. The aura of the crossbow bolts was very terrifying and should have been shot by divine crossbows. No matter how important the red goose was, it didn't need such a concentrated volley of crossbow bolts, nor did it need to use divine crossbows. Moreover, the information carried by the red goose had nothing to do with the urgent military situation. Then who were the real targets of these divine crossbow bolts? The sky above the gorge was slowly drifting with some clouds that couldn't block the morning light, and there was no sign of a storm. Yet in the next moment, an ear-piercing loud noise exploded in the sky like a thunderclap. Countless divine crossbow bolts once again broke through the air and disappeared. Then, 10 odd and terrifying sword flashes appeared in the sky. A cloud suddenly dispersed, and the whistling sound of something tearing through the air rang out. The river water suddenly became chaotic, and turbid waves rose into the sky. The wind in the forest on the other side of the gorge blew, and countless trees were snapped in half. Then, countless groans and cries of pain rang out. Countless streams of blood splashed out from the forest and landed on the surface of the river. Just like the red goose from before, it quickly disappeared without a trace. The iron chain on the river swayed violently, making clanking sounds. A pair of worn-out leather boots stepped on the chain. No matter how the chain swayed, no matter how fast the river flowed, no matter how sharp the crossbow bolts and sword flashes, that pair of old boots remained incomparably steady. The wind continued to howl over the river, rustling the white paper and causing it to rustle. It even drowned out the clattering of the chain. The man stood on the chain, his face covered in white paper. Even with several holes dug into his face, he still looked as terrifying as ever. But compared to before, the white paper on his face was missing a small section, and there were some blackened bloodstains on it, most likely the scars left behind by injuries from a long time ago. It was very obvious that he had suffered very heavy injuries. Moreover, he had been continuously pursued, and he didn't even have a moment to rest. Anyone else in this situation would think of fleeing, or at least conserve some energy. But this man did not do this. He raised his famous spear, blocked several crossbow bolts, forced back a sharp sword glow, and walked toward Fengyang City. Countless gazes fell on him, following his footsteps, silent and nervous. The man shouted at the county, "Who fucking dares to touch my tea?" All of Fengyang City was silent. No one dared to answer him. This shout silenced the entire city. This man was truly arrogant. He truly deserved to be called Painted Armor Xiao Zhang. Fengyang City's winter wild tea had become famous because of Xiao Zhang, but because he was wanted by the imperial court, it had been 2 years since he had participated in Fengyang City's winter wild tea party. The elders of Fengyang City had promised him a box of tea, and it had now been delivered to the prince of Xiang's estate. Everyone believed that he would not appear this year, but he had. So the people of the county did not know how to answer. The chain swayed, clattering, the river rippled, clattering. Other than these sounds, there was no other sound. Xiao Zhang walked down from the chain, stood on the ground of Fengyang City, and then began to ascend the long stone steps. At the very top of these steps was the Seven Treasures Stronghold. The highest point of the Seven Treasure Stronghold was the Treasure Pavilion. A box of tea was placed in the Treasure Pavilion. Had he really come to take the tea? Chapter 866. 10 some great Zhou Navy ships appeared up and down the river. Many soldiers of the Divine Crossbow Camp on board. Many experts of the imperial court stepped ashore and began to chase towards Fengyang City. A few Taoists in fluttering green robes flew out from the forest on the other side of the river. They tapped lightly on the ship and landed on the riverside. These blue-clothed Taoists had cold expressions and unfathomable cultivations. They carried Taoist swords and came from Luoyang's monastery of Eternal Spring. Worn leather boots stepped on the stone steps that were still wet from the morning dew. The tea merchants and pedestrians on both sides of the stone steps subconsciously retreated when they saw the figure walking over. It was unknown whether it was because of fear or shame. Xiao Zhang did not even glance at these people, nor did he pay any attention to the experts of the imperial court rushing over. Raising his spear, he expressionlessly continued up. Several cries of alarm came from some corner of the street and quickly faded away. In the slightly disorderly crowd, one could faintly make out crossbow bolts gleaming with cold light. Those blue-clothed Taoists flew up the stone steps like cranes and came behind Xiao Zhang. Their expressions were solemn, ready to strike at any moment. The road from the riverside to Seven Treasures' stronghold in Fengyang City was entirely made of stone steps. Some busybody had counted them and found that there were more than 7,000 steps. An ordinary person would need a very long time to walk them all. But for a person like Xiao Zhang, even if he was heavily injured, he still did not need too much time. A few moments later, he reached the middle section of the stone steps. On the side of the street was a very small grassy garden. Several dozen people stood on the grass and under the winter trees, looking at him with complex emotions, somewhat afraid and somewhat uneasy. Suddenly, an extremely dim and barely noticeable sword glow pierced through the vegetable basket held by one of the people and stabbed at Xiao Zhang. This was a position that no one would have expected. It was an extremely sinister attack. Xiao Zhang seemed to have been prepared. With a low snort, the spear in his hand flew through the air, carrying with it a fierce gust of wind as it accurately struck the sword glow. With a clap, the sword glow was instantly shattered into countless pieces. The assassin, hidden in the crowd, miserably retreated and crashed into the winter tree. The leaves fell on the assassin's body and were dyed red by the blood that spurted out. The assassin's face was filled with fear. He wanted to stand up and flee, but he no longer had the strength to do so. Unexpectedly, Xiao Zhang only glanced at the assassin and ignored him, continuing to walk up the stone steps. Chun Chang Sheng and the others had already left the tea house and were standing behind the crowd. Seeing this scene, Tang 36 praised, "Good move." On the night of the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, and in the days that followed, Xiao Zhang had always been an extremely thorny foe of the orthodoxy. But ever since he saved Wang Po by the Luo River, the situation had changed. At least in Tang 36's view, this expert who should have been at the top of the proclamation of liberation was a powerful external aid that his side had to fight for. Of course, he was emotionally inclined towards him. Hu 32 said nothing at Tang 36's praise, but Zhishio shook his head, clearly having a different view. His injuries are too severe. Chun Chang Sheng said worriedly, "More severe than we thought." Tang 36 finally understood. Based on Xiao Zhang's violent combat style, if he still had 60% or 70% of his combat power, even if the assassin was from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, he would still die from a single blow. Even if the other party was lucky enough to survive, with Xiao Zhang's style of doing things, he would definitely add another shot to kill the other party. Right now, the assassin was not dead. This could only mean that Xiao Zhang's injuries were far more severe than they had imagined. So severe that he was not even willing to waste the strength to make another shot. Just as expected, several experts of the imperial court took advantage of the slight confusion to attack Xiao Zhang. Xiao Zhang had succeeded in pushing back those experts, but his body also began to sway as if he would collapse at any moment. There are new injuries, but there are even more old ones. Zhishio was the same as Xiao Zhang. They both viewed battle as their lives, and his gaze was extremely sharp, allowing him to clearly see Xiao Zhang's problem. After being pursued by the imperial court for 3 whole years, fighting without rest or sleep, even if Xiao Zhang's body was forged from steel, he would still feel tired. Once he was tired, his reaction speed would inevitably drop, making it easy for him to be injured. Once he began to be injured, he would continue to be injured even more until his true essence was exhausted, and he was exhausted, no longer able to fight. He was a peak star condensation expert of the proclamation of liberation, and it could be said that he was unrivaled beneath the divine. He was like a solitary beast of the wilderness. Alas, after being pursued by the experts of the imperial court like scavenging vultures for so many days and fighting for such a long distance, there would eventually come a day when he would collapse. Xiao Zhang finally arrived at the highest point of Fengyang City. He stood in front of 7 Treasure Stronghold and narrowed his eyes as he gazed down at the river gorge. The morning sun had already risen over the mountain peaks. The sunlight was very fierce, shining upon the mountains and rivers, dazzling the eyes. He could clearly see that the experts of the imperial court and the crossbow soldiers had already surrounded all of Fengyang City. Although he had no intention of causing trouble, he was still rather annoyed, like he was looking at a swarm of flies that he could not shake off. A person like Xiao Zhang might truly feel that he was a solitary beast of the wilderness, but he would never admit that those experts of the imperial court who had pursued him for so many years were vultures. In his view, these fellows were just annoying mosquitoes that buzzed in his ears every day, making it hard for him to sleep, which was why he was so sleepy. Yes, he was just a little sleepy. He felt like he just wanted to sleep, Or else why would his eyelids be so heavy? Or else why would his lips be so numb? Or else why would he be pursued by these people? The drowsiness grew stronger and stronger, and his eyelids grew heavier and heavier. Even he couldn't tell if they were closed or squinting. The morning sun shone over Fengyang City and also on his face. He swayed a few times and then fell to the ground. But he did not roll down the stone steps. With a muffled bang, the end of the spear heavily pierced into the ground. At the most dangerous moment, it helped him support his extremely exhausted body. Upon seeing this sight, those people who had never forgotten the benefits Xiao Zhang had brought to Fengyang City found it difficult to continue watching and turned their heads away. A few people stood forward. The first to stand was a tea merchant of Fengyang City, along with 10 assistants of the tea shop. "Protect Master Xiao." The tea merchant clenched his teeth and shouted. He led his assistants to the stone steps of the Seven Treasure stronghold and stood in front of Xiao Zhang. They took out the swords and sabers that they usually use to protect themselves when selling tea, and even more took up the carrying poles that they usually use to carry goods and aimed them at the approaching experts of the imperial court. As a tea merchant, it was inevitable that he would encounter some trouble when selling tea. In Fengyang City, it was inevitable that there would be a few conflicts between people of the same trade. However, this tea merchant had a swift and fierce personality, and his assistants were also extremely valiant. They were rather famous in the city. But how could these people stop the experts of the imperial court and the crossbow soldiers? But soon after, even more tea merchants and commoners joined them. The stone steps of the Seven Treasure stronghold were quickly filled with people. Chapter 867. With some difficulty, Xiao Zhang opened his eyes. Seeing the nervous expressions on the faces of the ordinary people around him, his mood became rather strange. In the eyes of cultivators, he was a madman who only knew how to fight. They feared him, but when had there ever been people who sincerely respected and protected him? When he had said that the winter wild tea of Fengyang City was good, it had only been because he truly felt that this tea was countless times better than the great crimson gown that Liang Wang's son loved to drink. How could he have ever thought about what benefits it would bring to the people of this remote city? Yet these ordinary people that he normally couldn't even be bothered to glance at were now standing in front of him. Even though they were clearly scared to death, their hands trembling as they gripped their blades, they were not willing to leave. Suddenly, he felt that besides those delightful battles, there were still a few other things he had done in his life that could not be considered a loss. Like when he had saved Wang Po on the Luo River in the snowstorm, or when he had praised the winter wild tea of this small city. The simple yet fierce customs of Fengyang City were fully displayed at this moment. The men standing on the stone steps of the Seven Treasures stronghold and the people shouting outside were all proof of this. But the experts of the imperial court and the crossbow soldiers showed no change in their expressions. The blue-clothed Taoists were even more apathetic. In their eyes, both Xiao Zhang and the people of Fengyang City were no different from the dead. The blue-clothed Taoists walked up the stone steps. A bloody event was about to occur, and many people would die in Fengyang City today. The blue-clothed Taoists did not care. No matter how many people died, it could be explained away with the word popular revolt. The most tragic were naturally the people and the chief official who were about to die. The chief official of Fengyang City was naturally the county magistrate, but fortunately for him, the magistrate of Feng City had already arrived in order to prepare for tomorrow's winter wild tea party. No matter what happened today, the one ultimately responsible was naturally the magistrate. This magistrate would naturally not allow this bloody event to occur. The magistrate of Feng City was middle-aged. His face was handsome, his temples grizzled, and he had a rather dignified air. He clasped his hands to the blue-clothed Taoists and said, "Fellow Taoists, please wait a moment." The blue-clothed Taoists probably knew that he was the Prince of Xiang's disciple, so they stopped, their expressions still apathetic. "You fools only want to show off your momentary bravery. Do you want to bring my Fengyang City's entire population into the hands of injustice?" The prefectural magistrate looked at the tea merchant and the commoners on the stone steps. With a stern expression, he shouted, Who is this Xiao Zhang that you are protecting? He was a madman who killed without batting an eye. Does a man like him have any true feelings for you? It was just a casual remark back then. Is there a need for you to protect it with your lives? Someone in the crowd shouted, now that our tea is selling so well, everyone is earning money. Don't we need to thank them? The prefectural magistrate harshly rebuked, why can my Fengyang city's wild tea sell so well? That's because the imperial court helped you build the docks, open the merchant ships, and even offered this tea as a tribute. If you want to thank anyone, you should be thanking the imperial court, not this criminal who is wanted by the imperial court. There was a slight commotion among the surrounding people, and then they began to discuss. Although they had not dispersed, at least they were not as nervous as before. Xiao Zhang narrowed his eyes and said to the prefectural magistrate, you've got quite a glib tongue. The prefectural magistrate had a firm expression. There's no need to threaten this official. I'm not afraid of you. If you don't want to listen to me, just kill me. Xiao Zhang said, in the past, you would already be dead. The prefectural magistrate stared at the white paper on his face and harshly rebuked. So what if I die? I have a clear conscience and speak up for the people, so my death is worthy. But you are just a criminal wanted by the imperial court, someone who only knows how to bully the weak and kill the innocent. Truly a heinous crime that cannot be redeemed even if you die 10,000 times. Xiao Zhang has a violent temper, and many cultivators have died at his hands in battle. He truly can't be considered a good person, but bullying the weak and killing the innocent is not something he would do. It's not that he doesn't want to do it, but that he disdains doing it. Hu 32 whispered to Chen Changsheng in the crowd. Many experts of the imperial court had come to Fengyang City today, as well as the divine crossbow camp. Crucially, there were also those blue-clothed Taoists. If nothing unexpected happened, Xiao Zhang really might be about to meet his death. As Hu 32 whispered to Chen Changsheng, he looked at his face to see just what the Pope was thinking. The only ones capable of changing the situation were naturally Chen Changsheng's party. At this moment, Hu 32 suddenly realized that Zhishio, who had always been at the Pope's side, had disappeared. You don't understand us, or else you wouldn't have said those words, and you certainly wouldn't need to look at his eyes when speaking. Tang 36 said, look, Zhishio doesn't need to look at his eyes. He's leaving. Hu 32 didn't quite understand what he meant until he heard the sharp whistling of air from the top of the stone steps. The imperial court had been pursuing Xiao Zhang for 3 years, and the pursuers were constantly changing. But besides the assassins from the pavilion of heavenly secrets hiding in the shadows, the main force was still from the Bureau of Justice. Several experts from the Bureau of Justice dispersed the crowd and blocked Xiao Zhang's path of retreat. They untied the chains on their bodies and threw them at Xiao Zhang. The sinister chi of the chains and their techniques were far inferior to those of the 6 government laborers of the Tang clan's 5-kind man, but they were of the same lineage and possessed their own power. At this time, Xiao Zhang couldn't even stand steadily, so how could he avoid these iron chains? Since he couldn't avoid them, he just didn't. Being powerless to avoid did not mean that he was powerless to fight. He closed his eyes and thought about which move he should use to kill one of those blue-clothed Taoists and then jump into the river. Even if he died, he wanted to die in a way befitting of his name and be a little more arrogant. But in the next moment, he did not feel those cold and heavy chains wrap around his neck. Instead, he heard a series of clanging noises. These clangs were crisp and clear, clearly the clangs of metal, but they were also so crisp that they sounded like metal snapping. He opened his eyes and saw that in the light before him, shards of chains were flying about in the air. It was rather beautiful. Hidden in the depths of these shards were a few extremely sharp marks, but it was impossible to tell what sort of weapon they were. The blue-clothed Taoists saw the chains in the hands of the Bureau of Justice expert shatter. Their pupils constricted, and they began to fly up the stone steps. They paid no attention to the fierce cheese that had shattered the chains. Their goal was clear, to kill Xiao Zhang. Several extremely gloomy sword glows stabbed at Xiao Zhang's vitals from extremely strange angles. These blue-clothed Taoists came from Luoyang's monastery of Eternal Spring and cultivated the orthodox Taoist techniques of the orthodoxy. From a certain perspective, they were fellow disciples. But perhaps because the monastery of Eternal Spring had been hidden in the darkness of history for too many years, their sword style seemed even more bizarre and unfathomable. But their swords still failed to stab Xiao Zhang to death. The stone steps once more resounded with the crisp clangs of metal. Several extremely deep and invisible scars tore through the morning light, leaving behind blurs on the stone steps like the claws of a wolf. Chapter 868. As the dust settled, Zhixio's figure appeared in front of Xiao Zhang. He wore a single garment, and his sleeves and trousers had been cut very short, unable to hide the metal thorn-like hairs sticking out his body. 10 incomparably sharp and tough claws protruded from his hands, glinting with a cold light and making one shiver in fear. Even more frightening was that his face was also covered in hair, his teeth incomparably sharp, and his eyes were a crazed red. Seeing this scene, the crowd burst into cries of terror, and like a tide, they desperately retreated. Zhixio paid no attention to these things, only stared at the blue-clothed Taoists. These Taoists were very strong, but even more frightening was that they were very dangerous. Experts did not necessarily represent danger, and no one understood this principle better than Zhixio. Therefore, he did not hesitate to go into berserk mode immediately, using his strongest state to face the enemy. Several Taoist swords buzzed, vibrating at an extremely high frequency in the morning light. The blue-clothed Taoists slightly frowned at Zhixio. They said nothing, nor did they attack. Although Zhixio had spent his childhood fighting on the snowy plains of the northern border, he had always been very famous in the Great Zhou dynasty. The blue-clothed Taoists only needed a glance to recognize this young expert from the wolf tribe. Wofu Zhixio, the most dangerous of the younger generation of cultivators. This was a publicly acknowledged fact, even though it had been a very long time since he had displayed his terrifying experience and willpower in battle. If Zhixio had insisted on protecting Xiao Zhang, today would have been a bitter battle, perhaps even a bloody one. But the Taoists were only wary, not afraid. They very calmly determined that Zhixio could not change the final outcome, that Xiao Zhang would assuredly die. They had stopped not because Zhixio had suddenly appeared, but because they knew where Zhixio had gone after leaving the snowy plains and who he had been with this entire time. As expected, in the next moment, the crowd at the bottom of the stone steps retreated to the sides like a tide. Chen Changsheng walked up the stone steps. All of Fengyang City became incomparably quiet. No one here recognized Chen Changsheng, but the people of the Great Zhou dynasty were all believers of the orthodoxy, so who would not recognize the divine staff in his hand? Who in the entire continent was qualified to wield this divine staff? Finally, someone awoke from their daze and let out a cry of alarm, causing all of Fengyang City to wake up. Still like a tide, countless people knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Chen Changsheng. Countless pious and respectful voices combined together like thunder. I pay my respects to your holiness the Pope. Chen Changsheng arrived at Zhixio's side and turned to look at the blue-clothed Taoists. The green-clothed Taoists kneeled down to Chen Changsheng. Their expressions were respectful, and there was no sign of unwillingness on their faces. Chen Changsheng nodded. The officials present and the court experts from the Ministry of Justice also knelt down. Chen Changsheng turned to Xiao Zhang, looked at the rather worn-out white paper on his face, recalled the scene from their first meeting in Xuanyang City, and couldn't help but sigh. Even now, he did not look at the prefectural magistrate. The magistrate's expression fluctuated for a moment. In the end, he lifted his official robe and knelt down. Xiao Zhang didn't kneel because he didn't have the strength. Of course, even if he had a lot of strength, he wouldn't kneel to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng had been pope for 3 years now, especially in the recent period. With his reappearance and the matter of the cinnabar pill, his reputation on the continent had been rising. In Xiao Zhang's eyes, he was still that talented youth from Xuanyang City with a tough personality, but just as boring as Wang Pe. In short, in his view, Chun Changsheng was a junior, so why should he kneel? Xiao Zhang asked. Why are you here? Chun Changsheng replied. I just happened to be passing by. This was naturally an excuse, and no one would believe it. Xiao Zhang asked, What do you want to do? Chun Changsheng replied, I want to absolve you of your crimes. After saying this, he raised the divine staff in his hand. Next, he only needed Xiao Zhang to kneel, and then he would lightly tap the tip of the divine staff 3 times on Xiao Zhang's head to complete the absolution ceremony. Wait! The prefectural magistrate forcefully suppressed the fear in his heart and said to Chun Changsheng in a trembling voice, Since when can the Li Palace interfere in the affairs of the court? According to the laws of the Great Zhou and a few unwritten rules, the Li Palace normally could not interfere in the affairs of the court. Chun Changsheng finally glanced at the prefectural magistrate, but he still said nothing. According to the laws of the Great Zhou, as long as it is not a crime of rebellion, His Holiness the Pope has the right to absolve. Hu 32 had arrived at some point and impassively said to the prefectural magistrate, What rank did you get in the grand examination that you don't even know this? The prefectural magistrate's complexion became abnormally nasty. He was familiar with the laws and scriptures of the church, so he should have known that the Pope had the right to absolve, but the previous Pope had not used it in his several hundred years on the throne. Let alone him, perhaps even the ministers of the court had forgotten about this matter. The words he had spoken earlier had been so sonorous and forceful, so powerful that they still seemed to be echoing. You willfully slaughtered the innocent. Even 10,000 deaths cannot atone for it. Thus, you are wicked beyond redemption. But not long after he said these words, the Pope appeared in front of him and said that he would absolve Xiao Zhang of his crimes. This was the privilege of the Pope. It didn't matter if you were wicked beyond redemption or wicked beyond redemption. If I absolve you, then you're not guilty. Tang 36 also arrived. Pointing at the blue-clothed Taoists, he said, If the orthodoxy is not allowed to interfere in the affairs of the court, why would these Taoists of the Monastery of Eternal Spring dare to kill people on the street? Lord Prefectural Magistrate, shouldn't you first have these people arrested and thrown into prison? The blue-clothed Taoists did not change their expressions, but the prefectural magistrate's complexion became even more unsightly. At this moment, Xiao Zhang suddenly said, I won't kneel to you. If he insisted on not kneeling, how could the absolve ceremony be completed? No one had expected that just as the matter was about to be resolved, another problem like this would suddenly appear. Tang 36 looked at Xiao Zhang and prepared to say a few harsh words, but Chun Changsheng stopped him. It's fine if I stand higher. Chun Changsheng took a few steps up and then turned around. At this moment, he was several steps higher than Xiao Zhang, the height just right. Xiao Zhang did not need to kneel. The divine staff he raised could also fall flat on his head like a ruler. Without a single sound, the tip of the divine staff lightly touched Xiao Zhang's head 3 times, and the ceremony was complete. From start to finish, Xiao Zhang said nothing, and it was impossible to see his expression under the white paper. Was it astonishment or anger? After a while, he rubbed his head and said, It's a little itchy. Chapter 869. The people of Fengyang City continued to kneel on both sides of the long street, a dense mass of silence. Let's all disperse. I think everyone has a lot of work to do. Chun Changsheng said. Ever since that small village at the base of Mount Han, he had experienced the collective worship of believers, but he was still somewhat unused to it. In other words, he was not used to it because he was shy. That was why his voice was so low that not many people could hear him. Hurry up and disperse. Those who should open their businesses, those who should go to work, those who should go to school, go to school. Tang 36 shouted to the crowd on the street. His voice was very loud, his expression very natural, as if he was the Pope. Naturally, no one listened to him. Very quickly, the magistrate of Fengyang County dispatched soldiers to maintain order. The people on both sides of the street stood up, but didn't leave. They stared at Chun Changsheng, their faces full of different emotions: reverence, devotion, passion, excitement, and so on. To the people of this remote city, today might be the only day in their lives where they could personally see the Pope, so how could they be willing to leave? The priests of Fengyang City's Taoist church had also hurried over, but they were not much different from ordinary believers. Upon seeing Chen Changsheng, they were so nervous that they couldn't speak. Their Taoist robes were instantly drenched in sweat, and their legs were even softer than Xiao Zhang's. How could they be of any use? The azure-robed Taoists and the experts of the imperial court did not leave either. Tang 36 looked at them and said, "What? Could it be that you want to assassinate the Pope in front of tens of thousands of people and achieve the most foolish and heroic feat in all of history?" Such harsh, mocking, and crude words had their own uses, because the words that struck at the heart were too clear, so clear that everyone could understand them. The angry gazes of countless people fell on the Taoist in indigo and the experts of the imperial court. Of course, the officials were not spared. The officials and experts of the imperial court retreated to a distance, and the crossbowmen removed their crossbows to avoid being seen as disrespectful. The green-robed Taoists stood 100 feet away, but they had no intention of leaving. Chen Changsheng took out some pills. Hu 32 went to 7 Treasure Stronghold and asked for a bowl of water. Xiao Zhang took the bowl of clear water and directly swallowed the pill in his hand. Chen Changsheng hesitated for a moment and said, "That medicine is enough for 3 days." Hearing this, the white paper on Xiao Zhang's face rustled. There's no wind. Could it be snorting? As expected of an expert of the proclamation of liberation, to cause such a commotion when he's angry. Tang 36 said seriously, if it was in the past, he would not be afraid of Xiao Zhang, let alone now. These 3 years of confinement in the old mansion and the ancestral hall, especially the last half year, had really made him choke up his mouth too much. At some point, the matter of the Tang clan's young master being very similar to Su Li had spread throughout the continent. Xiao Zhang knew that bickering with this fellow had no benefit, so he was disinclined to pay attention. He said to Chen Changsheng, "Don't expect me to sell my life to the Li Palace. Something like life obviously can't be sold." Chen Changsheng said. Tang 36 said, "Who said we can't sell it? Have you considered how my idol is going to live? How do I play the last card in the ancestral hall?" Chen Changsheng looked at him and didn't say anything. Tang 36 waved his hand, indicating that he understood and would not speak carelessly again. Chen Changsheng looked at the blue-clothed Taoists nearby and said, "Guilty or not guilty, it's all a word of the imperial court. I can pardon all the false crimes they've placed on your body, but they can place new crimes on you at any time and continue to pursue you." Xiao Zhang replied, "Back when I attacked with my spear in the Luo River, I didn't think so much, but now I don't need to think. Your injuries are too heavy, and there are too many of them. You need to recuperate, so I want to arrange a place for you to temporarily lie low." Chen Changsheng said to him, "I am not Wang Pe, and there is no grudge between us. There is no need for you to refuse my good intentions." Xiao Zhang was quiet for a few moments, then said, "In truth, I've thought about finding a place to hide. After being pursued by the imperial court for 3 whole years, how could he not feel tired? No matter how arrogant he was, he knew that this couldn't continue. Not too long ago, he had been heavily injured and truly wanted to find a place to quietly recuperate. The problem was that this sort of place was not easy to find. There were very few sects that dared to oppose the dignity of the venerable Taoist Shang Xingzhou and had the ability to protect him. Places like Scholatry Manor and the Mountly Sword sect had old grudges with him, and he was not willing to lower his head to them, not even in death. The place he ultimately chose was the same place that Chen Changsheng had planned to take him to, Holy Maiden Peak. Chen Changsheng and the others were rather shocked by Xiao Zhang's words. "Since you've already gone to Holy Maiden Peak, why have you been pursued by the imperial court to this place?" "I was not able to enter Holy Maiden Peak." Xiao Zhang's gaze pierced through the 2 black holes on the white paper, becoming somewhat deep and serene. Perhaps he was recalling the scene from that day. "The sword array of those girls is very troublesome to deal with, and since they have no intention of entering, do I really have to beg?" Chen Changsheng found it even stranger. After the Luo River, the imperial court had begun to pursue Xiao Zhang. Everyone knew what the Li Palace's attitude toward him was. Even if Su Yorong was in seclusion, South Stream Temple had no one managing it, and the people of the temple did not like Xiao Zhang's conduct. Was there a need to be so unyielding? As he thought of these questions, he met Xiao Zhang's gaze. He suddenly understood that Xiao Zhang wanted to tell him that something had happened in South Stream Temple. When I left South Stream Temple, I encountered a group from the Imperial Court and quickly avoided them. Why? Because there were two palanquins inside. I'm not sure who they were, but they were both much stronger than me. Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 glanced at each other, knowing the answer. It was the Prince of Xiong and Wu Qiongbai. Where did they go? I'm not sure. I was ambushed by a monster, and in order to expel the poison, my old affliction flared up, and then I was chased by these flies. I was very vexed, so I came here to drink a cup of tea. Drinking tea truly could calm a mind, but Qin Changsheng and the others knew that Xiao Zhang had come here to drink tea because he felt that his life was about to end. They were both drinking tea, but the reason and state of mind were different. Qin Changsheng had also vaguely guessed who that monster was. Who else could poison and injure a person like Xiao Zhang? Have you been eating your fill recently? Qin Changsheng asked. Xiao Zhang replied, I can eat my fill, but I haven't been eating well. One had to be constantly on guard against an assassin's ambush or being poisoned at all times. Anyone would find it very difficult to eat in peace. There was a restaurant in Seven Treasures Stronghold. They found a private room and sat down. An extremely sumptuous feast of food and wine was quickly served. Qin Changsheng was also eating, so no one dared to poison him. Xiao Zhang paid no attention to the others. His chopsticks moved like the wind, quickly finishing all the good food on his plate. He did not drink any wine, only drank half a pot of winter wild tea. To the current him, eating in such a relaxed manner was already a very extravagant matter. After eating his fill, because he was too relaxed, Xiao Zhang fell asleep, his snoring seeming to echo through the entire county. Qin Changsheng and the others quietly watched him, not saying a word. Outside the restaurant, countless people quietly watched him, also saying nothing. We agreed to be each other's angels, but in the end, we saw Birdman. Birdman is Lin Hai's nickname. 2 days ago, I saw him posting photos of him and his wife, and suddenly thought of this not-so-funny joke. Then, because I like this scene at the end of this chapter, I named this chapter. Chapter 870. 3 days' worth of medicine had been drunk in one go. A normal person would probably have run into problems. Xiao Zhang would not have any problems. His recovery abilities were incredibly powerful. After sleeping soundly for an hour, he woke up and said, I'm full of energy. Qin Changsheng asked, You really don't want to travel together? If we're not on the same path, why travel together? Xiao Zhang stood up, took the dry rations and medicine box from Qin Changsheng, raised a spear, and walked out. He did not leave. Instead, he walked to the treasure pavilion at the very top of Seven Treasure Stronghold and took away the box of ancient tea. He then turned to the blue-clothed Taoists and experts of the Imperial Court and said, Come, continue. Xiao Zhang left, as did the blue-clothed Taoists, experts of the Imperial Court, and the Divine Crossbow Camp. Qin Changsheng and the others naturally had to leave as well. The people of Fengyang City on the two sides of the street did not leave. They prostrated to Qin Changsheng and piously paid their respects. Even many elders who found it difficult to move were carried to the side of the street by their sons and nephews, hoping to receive the Pope's blessing. At any other time, Qin Changsheng would have stayed in Fengyang City for a while to treat the illnesses of his believers or conduct a small ceremony to the light, as the scriptures of the church said. But he had no time now. He had to leave. Fortunately, Hu 32 had already sent a message to the neighboring Taoist churches and made arrangements for the distribution of medicine. Based on Qin Changsheng's request, 1 or 2 clerics skilled in the sacred light technique would also come. May the sacred light be with all of you. Qin Changsheng said to the people of Fengyang City. The people prostrated once more like a tide. Leaving Fengyang City, crossing the chains, they arrived in the sparsely populated gorge. Thinking of those scenes from before, Tang 36 said, Only just now did I feel that you really are the Pope. The Pope was divine and assuredly received the reverence of countless believers, but it was not so easy to receive love and respect from the heart. Normally, this required the accumulation of time, resulting in the accumulation of reputation. Qin Changsheng had only been Pope for 3 years. In a remote place like Fengyang City, if the Taoist churches had not properly announced the hymns, many believers might not even have known of this matter. He was able to receive the heartfelt love and respect of so many believers largely due to Enhua's promotion of the cinnabar pill. The orthodoxy's hymns have played an extremely important role. Qin Changsheng did not want to talk about these things, so he changed the subject. The little monster that Xiao Zhang encountered was probably Chusu. Tang 36 said, "It's possible. If Xiao Zhang hadn't been seriously injured beforehand, how could he have succeeded in his sneak attack?" Zhixio replied, "Not necessarily. Chusu was also injured in Wenshui City, so don't be left alone." Tang 36 understood what he meant and said in surprise, "Is that monster so troublesome?" Qin Changsheng said, "It is indeed troublesome." When he said this, there was a hint of worry between his brows. It was not because of Chusu, but because of the matter that Xiao Zhang had warned him about. There might be some problems with Holy Maiden Peak. Tang 36 and Zhixio also knew what he was worried about. After leaving Fengyang City, they traveled much faster than before. But Qin Changsheng still felt it wasn't fast enough. If something really did happen to South Stream Temple, would she, who was in seclusion at Holy Maiden Peak, encounter some sort of danger? After traveling several dozen li along the right bank of the river gorge, they could no longer see Fengyang City, and the number of boats on the river had greatly lessened. Qin Changsheng brought Nank out of the Garden of Zhou and then turned to Zhixio and the others. Tang 36 was somewhat conflicted. "Why do I feel like I've become a cat?" Zhixio asked. "Have you ever seen a cat cage as large as the Garden of Zhou?" Hu 32 humbly replied, "To be able to stop for a moment in His Majesty's miniature world is an enormous blessing." Zhixio creased his brow. Tang 36 sighed and said, "It's too much." Qin Changsheng said, "Hurry." Nank watched as they were sent into the Garden of Zhou and asked, "Qin Changsheng, where are we going?" She already knew and remembered Qin Changsheng's name, but she still didn't know who she was. She was as ignorant as a child. "We're going to Holy Maiden Peak." Qin Changsheng unfurled the map and pointed out the direction for her. Nank's eyes were still dazed. It was hard to tell if she understood the map or not. She asked how fast. Qin Changsheng replied, "As fast as we can. Of course, you can't be injured." Nank replied, "I understand." She then grabbed Qin Changsheng by the neck and jumped off the cliff into the river. The chilly wind of the river howled against his face, but Qin Changsheng felt much calmer. Then, he looked at the river rushing against his face and found it impossible to calm down. Only now did he remember that after that bloody battle in the snowy mountains, Nank's wings had disappeared. So how could she fly? A hint of confusion also appeared in Nank's dazed eyes. She only knew that she could fly, so she instinctively jumped into the air. There was no fear, no hesitation. But just how had she flown in the past? Nank relied on her lightning-fast movement technique to make several astonishing flashes in the air outside the cliff that were comparable to teleportation, but she still continued to descend. The two fell faster and faster, the river getting closer and closer. She nervously closed her eyes. Qin Changsheng sighed, thinking, "Without Gigi by my side, how will I quickly dry my drenched clothes?" Just as they were about to fall into the river, two voices came from behind Nank. These voices were somewhat like the white paper on Xiao Zhang's face being blown by the wind of Xuanyang City. It was Xuanyang City, not Fengyang City, because in Xuanyang City, the white paper on his face had been intact. It was also somewhat like a sail being raised in the shortest amount of time possible. Of course, it was most similar to spreading her wings. Dark green wings, Tinsum Zhang long unfurled from Nank's back, carrying her across the turbulent river and then into the air. Qin Changsheng was even closer to the river, the soles of his shoes even touching the water, leaving a few ripples. From a distance, it was like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Pope Chin Chong Sheng left Fengyang City, but the people of this small city were still unwilling to leave. In a restaurant by the river, a young master gazed at those people who were still gazing at the river gorge, a look of disgust on his face. Truly a bunch of fools. A young girl with a clear and beautiful appearance walked out. It was Mu Jiushi. This young master was Bi Tianxin. Seeing Mu Jiushi come out, Bi Tianxin instantly changed his expression and harmoniously said, "The wind on the neighboring river is strong, so be careful." When Mu Jiushi was expelled from the Li Palace, her legacy of the orthodoxy had been crippled, but her cultivation and strength from the great western continent still existed, so why would she care about the wind on the river? Bi Tianxin only wanted to express his concern. Mu Jiushi faintly smiled and very naturally accepted his concern, standing a little closer to him. Fengyang City is Fengjie and Yunyang, and the stone steps were written according to Yunyang's 10,000-step staircase. Yunyang is my hometown, and the clear wind on the river is the large character written in front of Yunyang's Zhangfei Temple. I have a particularly deep impression of it since I was a child. 10 years ago, when I first started using QQ, my good friend Qinyong had a headache over what name he should use to deceive girls. I offered these 4 characters, and then he continued to use them until today, but besides his wife, it seems like he didn't deceive anyone. In the end, Xiao Zhang left rather handsomely. Chapter 871. From Hanqiu City to Fengyang City, this young man and woman had traveled the entire journey. Although they were not as intimate as ordinary lovers, their expressions and movements were already much more natural. Mu Jiushi stood at Bi Tianxin's side, very naturally leaning against his chest. Even though this had happened several times already, Bi Tianxin still felt very excited, his heartbeat quickening. Mu Jiushi gave a rather mischievous smile, as if she found this very amusing. She extended a small hand as white as jade and pressed it against his chest. Beneath her palm was his heart. Bi Tianxin naturally did not care about her actions, but in the next moment, his expression suddenly turned abnormally solemn. A freak dressed in blue and wearing a copper mask had appeared in their room at some point. Bi Tianxin's pupils constricted at the sight of this blue-clothed stranger. Just who was this person that had been able to noiselessly enter their room? Neither he nor Mu Jiushi had sensed anything. The blue-clothed stranger had not released all of his qi, but Bi Tianxin could already faintly guess at his true cultivation level. His temples became slightly damp. He was only at the star condensation realm, but his parents were both experts of the divine domain, so his experience far surpassed that of his peers. As he traveled the world, Bi Tianxin had never worried about his safety, because no one dared to show him any disrespect. If there was anyone in the world that dared to risk the wrath of 2 experts of the divine domain to attack him, it could only be another expert of the divine domain. Bi Tianxin did not know who this blue-clothed stranger was, nor did he know why he had come to find him, but he sensed an extreme danger. "Hurry and leave. Don't worry about me." Bi Tianxin stared at the blue-clothed stranger and said to Mu Jiushi in his arms. A rather strange expression appeared on Mu Jiushi's face, a faint smile that seemed moved and yet also like ridicule. But she did not leave, nor did she ask anything. Even her palm remained on his chest. Bi Tianxin found this rather strange, but his attention was completely focused on the blue-clothed stranger, and he had no time to worry about this. Moreover, he still had an important matter to attend to. After all, he was the son of Wu Qiongbai and Bi Yanghan. Although he was not as exaggerated as Luoluo, he still carried a few powerful magical artifacts with him as he traveled the world. For instance, he was currently hiding a magical artifact in his sleeve. This magical artifact could not defeat an expert of the divine domain, but could form a divine boundary that could help him hold on for a while. At the same time, when this magical artifact was activated, his parents would sense it, no matter how far away they were. This was also why he could maintain his composure and allow Mu Jiushi to leave first. But in the next moment, he could no longer maintain his composure. His face instantly became abnormally pale because he discovered that there was a problem with a magic tool hidden in his sleeve. A looming but unbreakable aura appeared around the restaurant. It must have been set up by the strange man in cyan to prevent any possibility of him sending a message. But what about that magic tool? Why did something go wrong at such a crucial moment? He gazed at Mu Jiushi in his embrace, feeling her increasingly cold hands on his chest. He vaguely guessed at something, his eyes revealing pain and disbelief. Why? This was the question that Bi Tianxin wanted to know the answer to the most. Mu Jiushi raised her small face to him and mischievously stuck out the tip of her tongue. Smiling, she said, "Because I've never liked you." Bi Tianxin heard the answer, but he still found it hard to believe. His body began to tremble from anger and sorrow, his voice trembling as he asked, "Is that so? I never let you tell anyone, including your parents, precisely because I never wanted to be together with you." Mu Jiushi straightened her body, her petite hands still tightly pressed against his chest, as if she was somewhat greedy for his warmth. "I'll let a pitiful person like you die a little more understanding. Back then, I went with you to Hanqiu City precisely so that you and Qin would meet and then kill you. But because of a few things at the time, it was inconvenient for us to act, so we delayed until now. In truth, if you carefully thought about it, you could tell that this was a trap, but you were too stupid." She jeered. "What right do you have to marry me? I'm someone who's going to be Pope." Seeing the expression on her face, Bi Tianxin awoke from his previous fear and unease, leaving only pain and anger. He muttered, "So you wanted to frame Chun Changsheng and have the continent fall into endless civil strife. Presumably, all of this was your Mu clan's trap. This means that there was also a problem with Madame Mu going to White Emperor City back then." Mu Jiushi had not expected that on the verge of death, this hedonistic scion that she had always looked down upon would suddenly become much more clear-headed and rational. She couldn't help but be rather surprised. But now that matters had reached this step, there was no longer any possibility of change. Of course, just what sort of person is my older sister? She's the most intelligent genius of my clan. So how could she be forced to leave the great Western continent over something like the imperial throne? Mu Jiushi calmly said, "That brother-in-law of mine was a hero of his generation. But in the end, he still couldn't overcome the barrier of a beauty and was deceived by my sister for so many years. Although you can't compare to my brother-in-law, it seems that you're not too bad. Please die in peace. I promise you that I will remember the good you've done for me in these past few days." Bi Tianxin stared into her eyes and said, "If you want to frame Chun Changsheng, no one will believe you." Mu Jiushi softly said, "Everyone knows that you were killed by the Black Dragon." After saying this, her small hand suddenly exuded an extremely pure and frigid qi. Bi Tianxin's body was instantly frozen, unable to move. He noticed that her eyes had become abnormally deep and serene, like a cold lake. He understood what Mu Jiushi was planning to do, and how she was planning to frame Qin Changsheng. Mu Jiushi calmly gazed at him, the chill surging out of her palm growing thicker and thicker. Bi Tianxin's body and mind went cold, perhaps because of this deep cold qi, or because of her heartlessness and callousness. Frost covered his eyelashes, making them look like icicles hanging from the trees of the north. It was somewhat beautiful, but also somewhat sorrowful. He stared at Mu Jiushi's face like he wanted to forever engrave this beautiful, pure, and incomparably malicious face into his memory. "I will not go to the sea of stars. I will go to the abyss. I will never forget you. I will always wait there for you to come." These were Bi Tianxin's final words. After saying this, he closed his eyes and stopped breathing. His ethereal palace, star openings, meridians, and even his flesh and blood had all been frozen into crystals by the frigid cold, devoid of life. After some time, Mu Jiushi's palm finally left his chest. She gazed at Bi Tianxin, now a true ice sculpture, in silence for a very long time, her face somewhat pale. Perhaps it was because this deep cold qi had consumed too much of her true essence, or perhaps it was because of Bi Tianxin's final words before his death. The first two chapters had ended with the matter of my friend's wife. Today's chapter is a bit more miserable, so I won't talk about it. When it comes to love, one has to be calmer. Chapter 872. A little faster. The silent, blue-clothed stranger suddenly spoke. Wu Qiongbai will assuredly sense the end of his life. Experts of the divine domain like Bi Yanghong and Wu Qiongbai had assuredly left a brand in their son's sea of consciousness as a final guarantee of safety. The stranger's qi could separate the activity in the restaurant, and the chill Mu Jiushi had released from the world, but it could not sever the connection between true blood and the soul. Mu Jiushi awoke from her perplexed state and lightly flicked her finger. A gentle wind shot out from her fingertip and fell on Bi Tianxin's body. With a rustle, the ice sculpture collapsed into countless fragments, which were then blown away by the wind, becoming even more fragmented until they were crystalline grains like sand. The stranger extended his hand and swept the crystalline grains into his sleeve, then brought Mu Jiushi out of the restaurant. A priest came into the room and swept the floor clean with a broom. If Chen Changsheng were present, he would assuredly recognize this priest, because this priest was an old acquaintance of the Orthodox Academy. Priest Xin of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education had reappeared after 3 years, but he had suddenly appeared in Fengyang City. Why was this? Priest Xin went to a neighboring room and took a stool. Sitting in the nearby corridor, he closed his eyes and began to wait. His complexion was rather unsightly, because he was waiting for death. A fishing boat left the dock of Fengyang City and began to sail up the gorge. Once it was out of sight, it began to travel at an unimaginable speed despite the lack of wind. It didn't take long for the fishing boat to reach a river several dozen li away. The blue-clothed stranger stood at the bow of the boat, calmly gazing at the turbulent river. Perhaps he was trying to see something, or perhaps he was trying to find the tracks left behind by a certain person not long ago. Mu Jiushi sat in the boat, gazing at the stranger's back. The Black Dragon is not in Fengyang City today. The stranger replied, yes. Confused, Mu Jiushi asked, since we can't act in Hanqiu City, why can we act today? The stranger replied, first of all, time is very tight. Second, I don't know where the Black Dragon was that day, but I know where she is today, and no one else knows. Mu Jiushi didn't understand, but she believed in his words. The stranger in cyan seemed to have seen something and gently brushed his sleeves. The crystal powder, which still carried a lingering chill, fell from his sleeves and was washed away by the rushing river. There was no trace of it, not even a ripple. The upper reaches of the river of hatred had many tributaries. One of these tributaries had clear water, with many wild trees growing along its banks. The scenery was beautiful, and it was called the Tong River. The verdant mountains on the upper reaches of the Tong River were part of the 5 foothills of the south. There was a mountain in the depths of the mountain range that was enveloped in clouds and mist all year round, causing it to seem especially mysterious and holy. That was the holy land in the hearts of countless cultivators and believers, Holy Maiden Peak. South Stream Temple was located on Holy Maiden Peak, and its jurisdiction was even larger. At least several hundred mountains and 1,000 li of plains belonged to it. South Stream Temple, like the Longevity sect, was also the ancestral court of the southern faction of the Orthodoxy. It had many subordinate sects like Gentle Stream Monastery and Lotus Pond. Together with the ordinary people who had lived here for generations, it was bustling with activity. This was especially the case for the small village by the Tong River, which was bustling to the extreme. On a certain afternoon, the river bank outside the small village was peaceful as usual, but a sudden gust of wind blew. The reeds in the river were flattened, and the yellow oxen on the meadow galloped in fear. 2 dark green rays of light flashed through the air. A girl with a dull expression appeared on the riverbank. It was Nank. Chen Changsheng crawled up from the ground and brushed the dust off his body. He glanced at Nank, wanting to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. Soon after, the 3 of them descended from the sky onto the meadow. Tang 36 and Hu 32 were still very normal, just like before they had entered the Garden of Zhou. But Zhuxiu was in a rather sorry state. His clothes were covered in even more dust than Chen Changsheng's, and there were several holes on his clothes. There was even a wound on his face. Chen Changsheng was flabbergasted. He thought to himself, there shouldn't be any enemies in the Garden of Zhou, so just who did he fight with so fiercely? Seeing his gaze, Zheshio said, I fought with those monsters. Tang 36 recalled that scene and repeatedly shook his head. Hu 32 also had a complex expression. At the time, they had sat at the highest point of the mausoleum of Zhou. Thick smoke had roiled from outside the mausoleum of Zhou, and the monsters had surged in like a tide, their furious roars seeming like they wanted to tear apart the sky. Zheshio was like a stone. Sometimes he would be submerged, and sometimes he would appear. Watching him, they felt both admiration and worry. Chen Changsheng did not ask why Zheshio had fought with those monsters, because he knew the reason. Back in the plains of the unsetting sun, Zheshio had been blinded and had to flee with Qi Jian on his back. He had long since formed a deep grudge with those monsters. Hu 32 looked at Chen Changsheng, his expression even more respectful. In Wenshui City and in the valley, this bishop had been extremely respectful to Chen Changsheng, and it had come from the bottom of his heart. But now, his respect came from the depths of his heart. How could one judge the abilities and potential of a true expert? The simplest method was to look at the size of the miniature world they possessed. The larger the miniature world they could control, the higher their level. Now, he had confirmed the rumor. The Garden of Zhou truly was in the Pope's hands. Many years ago, when he was serving in the Hall of Pure Virtue, he had entered the green leaf world of the previous Pope. He was very sure that the green leaf world was not as large as the Garden of Zhou. This made him even more confident in the Pope, the orthodoxy, and in his own future. Chen Changsheng naturally did not know that having Hu 32 enter the Garden of Zhou would bring him the same benefits as having Hua and Chen Shou enter the Garden of Zhou. At this moment, his gaze rested on a very distant mountain range. The mountain range was beautiful and covered in a dense green. Even under the noon sun, there was not the slightest hint of dryness. Looking at it made one feel tranquil. The further one went into the mountain range, the denser the vegetation, the deeper the green, but it was not overgrown. The clouds gradually diluted the colors, making it all the more elegant and beautiful. In the depths of the clouds, one could faintly make out an extremely tall mountain. It seemed both real and illusory, making it impossible to make out its true appearance. That was Holy Maiden Peak. Seeing that distant mountain, Tang 36 was also rather excited. It had to be known that Holy Maiden Peak was a famous holy land, but this was his first time seeing it with his own eyes. Chen Changsheng's change in mood was mostly because Holy Maiden Peak was where Su Yurong lived and cultivated. In her later letters, Su Yurong had never mentioned what Holy Maiden Peak looked like. He had imagined it many times, even though Su Yurong was probably still in seclusion and could not meet him. But when he thought of her on that mountain, he still felt a great longing. It was just like that most cliché of descriptions. At this moment, he wanted nothing more than to grow a pair of wings and fly over. Nank walked in front of him, raised her head, and very seriously said, "You want to fly? Why don't you tell me?" Chapter 873. If he could fly, he would not have had Nank stop by the river outside the town. Instead, he would have flown all the way to Holy Maiden Peak. However, he could not do that because he had to show respect to Holy Maiden Peak. Moreover, Holy Maiden Peak had restrictions. Even if he was the Pope, bringing the little demon princess in a Holy Maiden Peak would inevitably incur the wrath of the Pope. Their party had to pass through the town at the foot of the mountain, so Nank once again entered the Garden of Zhou. The houses in the town were very densely packed. It could be seen that the people here lived quite well. There were no overly dilapidated houses. The Tong River was already in the southern part of the continent, and its climate was warm. Even in the height of winter, it wasn't very cold. Noon was a good time to take a nap. They passed through the town without meeting too many people. There was a store on the side of the street that was open. Tang 36 really wanted to buy some trinkets to prove that he had been here before. Zheshio wanted to buy some dried meat in case he needed it, but seeing Chen Changsheng's expression, neither of them said anything. Xiao Zhang had not been very clear in Fengyang County, because he had not entered Holy Maiden Peak, but it was clear that he felt that something had happened at Holy Maiden Peak. Chen Changsheng also came to the same conclusion, so he was naturally a little anxious. Because they were in a hurry, when they passed by the shop, they didn't notice the conversation between the lady boss and the other two people inside. It's not a problem that we're missing one, and I'm not in a good position to play cards. It's just that the fairy hasn't been here for so long, and I'm worried that something might have happened to her. Bah, even if your beard is burnt, nothing will happen to the fairy. Hey, didn't I just pay for 3 brick houses for your family? Is there a need to curse me to protect her? Speaking of which, where did the fairy go? After passing the town, they entered the forest. It was very quiet, and there were not many people on the road. Chen Changsheng and the others quickened their pace, their speed becoming faster and faster. If a normal person were to look at them, they might not even be able to see their figures clearly. The road gradually ascended. Under the cover of the forest, it rose higher and higher without a trace. Soon, they arrived at the mountain. More than 10 miles later, a stone door appeared on the mountain path. Chen Changsheng didn't pay attention to what was written on the stone door and directly walked forward. Then he was stopped. Since this was the mountain gate of South Stream Temple, there were naturally disciples guarding the gate, 2 girls of 14 or 15. These 2 female disciples didn't have a high position in the temple and didn't have the chance to travel far. They didn't go to the capital like their senior sisters, so they didn't recognize Chen Changsheng and Tang 36. Stop right there. Who are you? The 2 girls gripped the hilts of their swords and shouted at Chen Changsheng's group. The expressions on their faces were a little nervous. It seemed like they had no experience at all. Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 looked at each other. They both saw the problem. Even if the mountain gate was far away from the temple and was guarded by ordinary disciples, there would inevitably be many disciples from subordinate sects or fellow cultivators who came out of admiration to pay a visit. South Stream Temple should have arranged for some mature and steady disciples. So why did it send 2 girls? Tang 36 shook his head slightly, indicating that Chen Changsheng should not reveal his identity yet. He stepped forward and said, "We are disciples of the emotion-severing sect of Hanqiu City. We have come a Holy Maiden Peak to sightsee." A young girl nervously said, "What kind of place is Holy Maiden Peak? Is it a place you can enter just because you want to?" These words made Chen Changsheng's group feel even more strange. Whether it was the question of who had come before them or these words, they all sounded like they had come from a book. How was this the tone a disciple of South Stream Temple should have? Tang 36 stared at the girl and arched his brows. When did South Stream Temple have this sort of rule? Whether it was the Li Palace or Holy Maiden Peak, they both emphasized the transmission of the Tao to all living beings. They would never refuse entry to believers or fellow cultivators, but they would cut off a few truly important places. These words made the 2 South Stream Temple girls even more nervous. They didn't know how to reply. Perhaps because the temple is closing, the guards are rather strict. Chen Changsheng said to Tang 36, "Just state your identity." Hearing this, the 2 South Stream Temple girls suddenly came to their senses. As it turned out, the disciples of the emotion-severing sect that they had spoken of were all fake. They became even more nervous. Unsheathing their swords, they asked in trembling voices, "Just who are you?" Tang 36 originally wanted to directly state his identity, but seeing their nervous expressions, he couldn't help but find it rather amusing. He wanted to tease them, so he walked forward. The 2 South Stream Temple girls became even more nervous. The swords in their hands began to tremble, but they had no intention of backing down. With 2 shouts that were clearly still trembling, the 2 girls thrust their swords at Tang 36. Before attacking, the 2 girls were clearly very nervous, even a little afraid. But once they used their sword techniques, all their nervousness and fear vanished, because they were disciples of South Stream Temple and were using the sword style of South Stream Temple. The elegant sword glows illuminated the stone door on the mountain path as they descended upon Tang 36. Zhixio felt respect for this sight. If one did not bitterly train from morning to night, it would have been impossible to use the sword to calm their minds. Hu 32 felt a shiver run down his spine at this sight. He thought, If these two most ordinary disciples of South Stream Temple have such exquisite sword techniques, it seems that I can't underestimate my fellow disciples of the South. Qin Chang Sheng felt suspicious at this sight. What sort of sword style is this? It seems rather familiar, and it seems to be hiding some sort of trick. Standing in this scene, Tang 36 saw the elegant sword glows coming at him, let alone feeling fear. He didn't even have much desire to fight. Yes, the sword styles of these two South Stream Temple girls were truly exquisite, but their cultivations were far too ordinary. They weren't even at ethereal opening, so how could they be his match? He chuckled and stepped forward. He was prepared to easily break through the barrier and perfectly display his elegant demeanor to the two girls. But in the next moment, his laughter turned into a surprised gasp, and then into an annoyed ouch. The sword glows suddenly faded as the two girls retreated to the back of the mountain gate, their chests rising and falling as their expressions once more became nervous. Tang 36 was not injured, but his sleeve had been torn open, making him seem rather laughable. He could not laugh. If this were a real battle, he naturally would not have lost, but in a contest of swords, he had already lost one move. These two South Stream Temple girls had ordinary cultivations, so no matter how exquisite their sword techniques were, they should not have been able to defeat him. The problem was that the sword techniques of these two South Stream Temple girls seemed to have some sort of connection. Once they attacked at the same time, they seemed to be able to naturally coordinate. The power of their sword techniques abruptly increased, their sword techniques even more exquisite, as if they had calculated all of Tang 36's paths of retreat. Qin Chang Sheng, who had learned the intellectual sword from Su Li, had only found 3 holes in the two South Stream Temple girls' sword techniques when they reached the middle stage. From this perspective, the sword techniques of these two South Stream Temple girls, purely in terms of exquisiteness, even far surpassed those star condensation experts he had encountered in the wilderness. Just what sort of sword style was this for it to be so formidable? Chapter 874. It should be the Unity Sword Art, Who 32 said. Upon hearing this name, Chun Changsheng recalled this legendary sword style. Holy Maiden Peak was most famous for the South Stream Temple sword array. It was said that countless years ago, when Zhou Dufu, the supreme expert beneath the starry sky, charged into Holy Maiden Peak, he had been trapped by this sword array for a while. During the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, Su Yurong had left several dozen South Stream Temple disciples behind for Chun Changsheng, intimidating many experts in the Orthodox Academy. This was also because of this sword array. The foundation of the South Stream Temple sword array was the Unity Sword Art. This sort of exquisite sword art required 2 or more people to use. What was most important was the trust between the person wielding the sword and his companion, as well as the connection between their minds. It was said that at the end, 2 South Stream Temple disciples could use the Unity Sword Art to defeat 4 opponents of the same level. 3 South Stream Temple disciples could defeat 9 opponents of the same level, and so on and so forth. The more South Stream Temple disciples that simultaneously used the Unity Sword Art, the more terrifying the power they could display. The strongest version of the South Stream Temple sword array was said to be formed from 300-some disciples, so one could imagine its power. Not even an expert of the divine domain would be willing to face its edge head-on. It was no wonder that Xiao Zhang had said in Fengyang City that the sword array of those girls was troublesome. But Qin Changsheng still felt that there was a problem. The sword style used by these 2 South Stream Temple disciples was not completely the same as the Unity sword art he had seen in the books. It seemed to have undergone some sort of modification. The problem was just who had the ability to modify a sword style as exquisite as the Unity sword art. Not even Su Li could do it. Tang 36 also heard Hu 32's words and realized that this was the Unity sword art of South Stream Temple. But he had no time to care, because his sleeve was already torn and he was extremely angry. Gripping his sheath, he shouted at the 2 South Stream Temple disciples, "You've made me unhappy." Zhixiu turned his head, not wanting to see him. Qin Changsheng said, "It's your own problem. Why are you scaring them?" Tang 36 angrily retorted, "You're not even married, so can you not protect your wife's side so early?" The two South Stream Temple disciples glanced at each other, confused. They had no idea what these people were talking about. Tang 36's smile faded, and his expression became extremely serious. He raised the Wenshui sword and said, "Please advise." He naturally would not be truly angry. This represented his respect for these two disciples of South Stream Temple. The two girls sensed the change in his mind, and their expressions became more solemn as they raised the swords in their hands. The sword light suddenly illuminated the mountain path again. Countless sharp gusts of wind rose in the forest around the stone gate, and cracks appeared on the tree trunks. With two crisp cracking sounds, the two girls were pushed back behind the stone door. Their faces were pale, and only half of their swords remained in their hands. "Thank you." Tang 36 tied the sword back to his waist. From the beginning to the end, the Wenshui sword never left its sheath. Seeing this scene, the two young women sensed the disparity between them and could not help but feel despair and humiliation. South Stream Temple was the holy land of the Taoist faith. Whether in the town or in other sects, they were regarded as fairy-like existences. No one dared to treat them with such disrespect. A few days ago, when they were guarding the mountain gate, they had also encountered fellow Taoists and ordinary tourists who wanted to enter the mountain. They only needed to say a word, and the other party would retreat. They did not encounter anyone who dared to break into the mountain. Even if the disciples of South Stream Temple were no match, they could not allow the other party to break in a Holy Maiden Peak. They took something out of their sleeves, perhaps a magical artifact, and prepared to send a warning down the mountain. But at this moment, two broad palms landed on their shoulders, controlling their two most important meridians. At some point, Hu 32 had silently passed through the mountain gate and appeared behind the two South Stream Temple disciples. He smiled and shook his head, indicating that they should not move on their own. In his view, this warm smile was as frightening as a demon in the eyes of these two South Stream Temple disciples. Feeling the man's hand on their shoulders, imagining that he only needed to circulate a little of his true essence to sever their meridians, imagining how he had so easily broken through the mountain gate they were guarding, the two girls were anxious, angry, and afraid. Suddenly, they began to cry. I said that the words written in the book couldn't be copied, or else something would definitely happen. Senior sisters are always busy in the temple and don't have the energy to care about us. So how could I know how to guard the mountain gate? The two girls wept, occasionally using their sleeves to wipe away their tears. They looked extremely pitiful, like pear blossoms in the rain. Tang 36 repeatedly shook his head, thinking, just what's wrong with South Stream Temple that it would send two girls who clearly don't understand the ways of the world to guard the mountain gate. No matter how sorrowfully the two girls wept, Hu 32's expression did not change. He still faintly smiled, and then he glanced at Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng understood his meaning and said, "I'll go take a look first." Zhishio said, "I'll be in the shadows." After saying this, he vanished into the forest on the side of the path. The fierce sun cast countless shadows on the leaves, making it impossible to tell which one was him. After passing through the front gate of South Stream Temple, one was still faced with that seemingly endless mountain path. At a time like this, it was not suitable for Nang to appear. Chen Changsheng pushed his speed to the limit, occasionally using the Yesher step. Sometimes he would move east, sometimes he would move west, sweeping through the mountain path like a gust of wind. Only when he made a turn would he leave behind an afterimage on the glossy surface of the green bamboo. The mountains were beautiful and the scenery was pleasing to the eye, but he was in no mood to look at them. He allowed the howling winds to batter him, his eyes wide open as he stared at the slightest change on the mountain path. His spiritual sense would also go with the wind, allowing him to sense what was going on up ahead. His primary goal was to understand those arrays. In their letters, Su Yurong had not discussed too many specific matters of South Stream Temple, but she had mentioned those arrays or seals on the mountain path. Just as expected, on the 10 or so miles of mountain path behind a bamboo forest, Chen Changsheng encountered several very exquisite arrays. Even with his strength, Even if he used 10,000 swords at the same time, it would still take him a long time to break through those arrays. Fortunately, in the Garden of Zhou, in the Snowy Temple, and in the Mausoleum of Books, he had discussed this subject with Su Yurong, so he had a certain understanding of these arrays, coupled with the fact that he was now the Pope. And although there were some differences between the north and south of the orthodoxy, they still came from the same source. So he very quickly found the life gate of these arrays and easily passed through them. The life gate of these arrays would often leave the mountain path and end up under a stream or next to a boulder, but the general direction would not be wrong. He continued to rush toward that cliff. Behind the cliff was a cloud that seemed to not disperse for 10,000 years. Holy Maiden Peak was faintly discernible in this cloud. Even though he was already very close, it was still difficult to make out its true appearance.